hear myself through my headphones. Yes, man. Like, I feel real good about this right now.
Pay attention, because you are now listening to Permission to Speak Freely.
Hey man, hey, look, I'm gonna kick this thing off real quick, man. Hey, so you guys already know results came out. You know, Command Senior Chief, Command Master Chief, and you guys already know my boy, my homie, my dude, Dumbo was on that list, man. Dumbo is on that list, man. We like I knew it already, man. It was no doubts in my mind that he was gonna be on there. And it was all about the timing. It was all about when the list came out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was all about the list. But I just wanna but my biggest thing is now, man, it's like, world, is his head gonna get big? Is he gonna come on here and is he gonna come on here and he gonna act a little bit different? We don't know yet, Tish. We really don't know what we about to get.
We don't know.
We don't know what.
We don't know.
Dumbo might be that guy, you know, come up in the mess and say, hey, it's gonna be some changes. You know what I mean?
I did that shit as a regular chief, right? I did that as a brand new chief.
Hey, look. And you guys hear me saying that. You heard Dumbo just say that real quick, man. But we talked about it on some of the earlier podcasts, man. Dumbo said that shit as a brand new chief, man. It's gonna be some changes. So hey, when he get that call saying come to your mess, get ready, man. Call me if you want to. I give you guys a lowdown, man. He ain't fucking around, man.
Man.
Talk,
big
man.
congrats, Bo. Congrats.
Big congrats, man. Very, very proud of you, man. And I'm saying that like for real, man. Like you one of those dudes, man. You know that when you come to work and we talk about taking care of sailors, you at the top of my list on getting shit done, man. And you take pride in it and you give a fuck. And that's what we need, man. So again, congratulations, man, on that shit. It's a real deal.
Yeah, man.
Most definitely. He's somebody who don't just like talk the talk, he walks the walk too. And you put so much passion into wanting to be a command senior chief. Like it wasn't just like something you just kind of stumbled on. You've been talking about this since like I've known you at least. Like you've been talking about, you know, the PQS that you had to do or whatever. You going and talking to this person and that person, like you took it serious. And that just shows the amount of passion that you put into not just like having the title, but actually being that person, like being a good command senior chief. So big congrats.
Thank you.
Much deserved.
Thank you. I don't want to get to the new gen thought process, but I am dealing with some imposter syndrome right now. Y'all know, like I want y'all to know that, like I am kind of dealing with that. But I'm gonna work through that. Like we're gonna be all right. We're gonna have fun. We're gonna have a good time. And I just think I'm like, yo, I don't know anything. Like what the fuck? The hell do I know? Like you know what I mean? Like what do I know for real? You know what I mean? But man, we gonna figure that out. We gonna work it out. You know, the big thing is where we going. You know, and that's kind of held up until the command senior chiefs, the ones who already sit in that master chief results come out. Then more bullets are pop, and we kind of figure out, you know, where we gonna go. But I noticed coming off that episode with Captain Aloda, man, I started reading the Energy Bus book, and I know that I'm coming with positive energy. I'm coming with that energy every single time, man, based off of that. And I recommend everybody to read that book, The Energy Bus, man. I can tell he took anybody that think he's a good leader, you know, and I'm giving him a lot of props right now on our episode, but anybody that think he took a lot out of that book, like just from the first couple, you know, Energy Vampires, that came out that book. You know what I mean? So I highly recommend that, man. Like read, open up shit, read, boom. You know, I'm like, man, like, you know, these people do like Fridays with Fleet and they do these different things. I've questioned if I could do that, like for the last couple years, Damon, to be honest, you know, like we taught this pod, we have fun. Remember, and I said like, yo, we gonna ask more questions than we answer. You know, and it's always because I just don't think I have the fucking answers. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Even when you was like, you know, like I think last year, T's Damon was like, yo, we gonna write a book. And I'm like, what the fuck I don't think I'm ready for that yet. You know what I mean? You know, but I think every day we're building toward being able to have something, you know, to put in there. So I look forward to whatever like lies ahead. And I appreciate everybody that helped me, because the shit thing happened. It was like a bunch of Master Chiefs that helped, a bunch of dudes. And then just all the sailors and everything that helped. I'm a real quick say something real quick about it. I'm in Norfolk right now, and I'm stationed in Norfolk. This is the first duty station that I was ever stationed at. And I went to the Super Bowl I'm at a friend's house, and the friend whose house I went to just so happened to be the first third class that I ever met, EM3 that I ever met in the Navy. My guy, Nick Hip. And I was with my first Works in a Suit, Justin Bragg, who I've been with Bragg since I've been back in Virginia. But being able to link with Nick, man, it was more emotional for me than they knew. And plus, they sent me to the wrong damn house. Bragg sent me to the wrong damn house first. So I stopped at the wrong person's house to go watch the Super Bowl. Like, yo, here I am with bottles. She's like, oh no, they moved 4 years ago, right? But I get there, but, I say all that to say, like, this little bit of time that I've been on a carrier with this division that I'm with and able to be back in Norfolk where I kind of started my career, and to be able to be back at home with like the guys that I kind of started my career with, to me was the perfect way to enter into like a new career, because you take the EM off, you go command, you put the cookie on. So just being able to come back home for a little bit, right? And I call it home because this is where my Navy career started, and be with the people that started it. They don't know how much that means to me.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, man. But I tell you this right now, man, look, you're going to have fun doing it, man. But what if you get a situation, man, that just popped up like we got right now, man? We got a chief out there, man, selling secrets, man. What is that? What if your chief out there selling some secrets, man? Like that's gonna be on your watch, bro.
Yeah, we gonna have the Pharaoh duck. We gonna have to go back old school, man. Y'all ain't got me yet, baby. Y'all ain't got me yet. We still having fun over here. Yo, dog, like, what's up? That's crazy. That story crazy. I don't think we're gonna get too deep into it, y'all. We got a guest. We got a big guest coming up. Big time guest coming up. So I don't think we're gonna get into it. But definitely Chief Petty Officer Fire Control Bryce Pedicini has been charged with espionage, accused of giving documents to an employee of foreign government between November 2022 and February 2023. One of the big reasons I'm talking about it is because y'all junior sellers, y'all gonna check us if we don't talk about it. What I'm saying? Yeah, that shit. Hey, it's trash. Hey, my man.
Trash.
You're trash. Like, it's trash. It's garbage. Like, we don't gotta try to save my guy. We ain't gotta try to be liberal. We ain't gotta try to speak on his good on his behalf. That shit is trash and garbage, and it puts us at it. You putting your whole. I remember we had a seller go out on a quarterdeck, Damon, with a phone, and we had to have a whole spill with her, like during seeing anchor, and we had to have a whole spill with her about safety concerns and shit like that. You got chiefs selling. I'm just selling secrets. You got chiefs selling secrets. You putting your whole shit, crazy, your whole Navy at risk. You're trash, dog. Like, you're trash.
Trash, bro.
Trash.
It's crazy, man. Like a chief, man. You know what I'm saying? Years of experience, man. Like to be honest with you, man. Like when I think of stuff like that, man, I think about like how many real years it's been with back. Is this just happened? I started thinking like way outside the box on this shit, man. When you catch somebody that got this much experience because a chief, so you've been in for a little while, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
And then what I'm saying is like this go years back. So we talking about be years and years and years. Who you got right there,
That's
man?
Him, yo.
That's the dude. That's dude.
Yeah.
That's dude.
Hey,
that's dude.
What's up with him, man?
Telling you. How many GMTs he done? And how many of those GMTs did he do and be like, oh, I'm doing this shit now?
That's
bro. He wild,
I'm the insider threat.
Yeah.
I'm the insider
he's
threat.
in Japan. Like, he's super close to
he's close.
Yeah. He
He's
wild.
close.
I bet a lot more shit gonna come out about this, man. When it all is said and done, we might hear some more shit about this dude, man.
Yeah.
Man, what if he a listener to the pod? Like, yo, y'all got listen. Hey, dog, we ain't for you, dog.
We don't want you here, bro. You don't hit us up. Don't say nothing to me, bro.
If you listen to this time,
no email.
We not your kind.
Yeah,
not nothing. Don't comment. Don't like it.
It's no way this was a mistake. Like, it's no way this. It's no way this was a mistake. And then, do y'all know about? I don't even know if I want to. Do y'all know about the Air Force member who set himself on fire outside of the Israeli embassy to protest the war?
No.
Don't know, but I did hear about it though. That's a crazy story, man, right there, man. I did hear. So a lot of stuff, man, in my chat, man. Well, man, we got a lot of senior people, man. Anything that really kind of like comes up in the Navy, we kind of put in this chat when y'all like let's talk about it a little bit. And that was one of those things, man, where when we saw that, like, that's crazy, man. Like trying, I don't know, like the whole story behind it, but if you're trying to get your point across, that's a wild way to get it, man.
Yeah.
That's a wild way to get it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Hey, y'all, look, man. We got a guest coming up. We're going to leave it as a surprise till, if you looked at the episode already, you know who it is already. So if you looked at the episode notes, you know who it is. But we're going to get into a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of leadership stuff and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of this person. And this definitely, I think this is going to be an episode for the leaders. I think this is going to be an episode for the leaders. Definitely one of those. So, but love y'all, appreciate y'all, and can't wait for y'all to hear this conversation.
Let's go. Let's get it.
Hey, this is what I got to say about this one, though. If you read it, 9 times out of 10, he wrote it, right? So on our podcast today, we got retired Fleet Master Chief Paul Kingsbury, selected as the 18th Fleet Master Chief for U.S. Fleet Forces Command, right? And we're going to do a little bit of an intro, y'all, just so y'all know who we're talking to and what we're talking about. So authored the second edition of the CPO Guide, right? Actually I got a copy of that in hand right now in the CPO Guide.
Let's go.
Right? Petty Officer's Guide, authored the Petty Officer's Guide and the 26th edition of the Bluejackets Manual. Served as a member of the U.S. Navy Institute's editorial board, published a gang of articles and Proceedings, the USNI Blog, and Joint Forces Quarterly. Had a spot on Paul's like a little small spot on the Proceedings podcast, correct?
Yeah, I used to do kind of co-host and then started taking the lead for the Enlisted authors, right? So towards the end of my time there, I called it From the Deck Plates. So I would do those kind of segments for Proceedings.
Y'all ever wonder who was receiving all those awards for USNI, the general and enlisted essays? It was Paul. Served as president of...
Not all of them now.
Yeah.
Come on, not all of them.
All of them.
I don't know if you're still serving, but I know Non-Commissioned Officers Association president.
Yeah, my term ended last summer on that, so I did 3 years doing that.
And then associates from Tidewater Community. Shout out to Tidewater Community. Yes. And a Bachelor of Science and Liberal Arts from Excelsior. Do you got any more degrees?
Nope. That was enough.
Okay. And then the host of, right now, I've been binging on a personal favorite of mine, the Cutlass Podcast. So the host of the Cutlass Podcast. And I'm sure I missed a whole lot because Paul did a whole lot. You know what I'm saying?
Well, no.
Yeah.
But I really want to welcome you to Permission to Speak Freely. And I want to start off by saying this. I was at SCA about 2 to 3 years ago, I think. I was at SCA about 2 to 3 years ago. And they give us these books. They give us mandatory books and stuff like that. And then one of the names, on the book, you get to look at it. You like Fleet, Paul A. Kingsbury, USN. Damn, so this guy, wrote the book, and this was just a joke, right? But this guy wrote the book on how to be a chief, right? So that was kind of the joke at the time.
Yep.
But another thing about this that I really liked is that I read a lot of leadership books, right? I'm mid-30s, right? So I'm going through that mid-30s crisis where you just read a whole lot of leadership books. And a lot of them don't speak to naval leadership, like being a chief, being in that position. But the CPO guide did speak to naval leadership. And then shortly after in the week, the MCPON came, Russell Smith. He came and talked to us and he brought your name up again as he was kind of describing his team in a super team format. That wasn't what he was saying, but he was describing it kind of like some Captain Planet type stuff where you got this person here, this person here, this person here. And he was like, I got Paul Kingsbury as the brains of my operation. And he was like, and you need these things to kind of work as a team. Yeah. So in all of that, I was looking forward to having a conversation with you. So I think we all appreciate you being here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. And just how are you today?
No, things are great. Thanks for this opportunity. So I've been following you guys for a bit. I mean, I try to. I do now work for Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. I'm their Director of Uniform Service Relations. So I drive their whole national outreach plan. So that keeps me busy, or it's kept me busy for a while, but things are good. I think I mentioned that, right? I just laid down an episode or recorded with MCPON and Dwayne Bushy this afternoon. So I'll put that together. You guys have, I think every chief knows him. He stays relevant, connected. So it's always it's really a privilege to be able to get a guy like that for an hour and just pick his brain. And we could have went for 3 hours, but things are good. I'm staying busy. So I just submitted the manuscript for the 3rd edition of the Chief Petty Officer's Guide. So I'm excited about that. That'll take about a year, but with the Petty Officer's Guide in place, it gave me an opportunity to kind of build that out, right? So the first one is kind of very, that was the only one that was there. It was originally written, MCPON Hagen was one of the authors, and a guy, John Lay, he wrote the first one. So they're the first ones who put anything in writing about chiefing kind of stuff. So I just, Naval Institute, when I was, they had wanted to revise it. And then they knew I was writing. I enjoyed writing. I had a lot of stuff written down as I would travel. And I had the opportunity to do that. But the 3rd one now is going to be really cool, because now it's like, welcome to the mess, all the way up to becoming the MCPON or the SEAC, right? So all this kind of how to prepare to be a command senior chief or command mass chief. And now you're a command mass chief. How do you thrive in that position? And how does it change when you go onto a flag staff? These are kind of worlds that people don't know, and what kind of things you got to know to prepare for that. So I'm hoping now the senior chiefs and the mass chiefs go, okay, there's probably something in here, instead of like, well, I've been chiefing long enough. I don't need any kind of reflection on that kind of thing. But life's good. I can't complain.
Yeah. And like, it's not just a Chiefs manual, right? For the young sailors that listen, right? Because we get a lot of young sailors listen. And when we talk to like fleets and forces and some master chiefs, and they like, hey, what about us? What about us, right? Yep. You got the Bluejackets manual right there. You got the Petty Officers manual right there. And then it's the Chiefs manual. So it's the Chiefs guy. So that's all 3 levels right there. You kind of connect with everybody in those levels. And I hope that we, do that through this episode. Sorry,
absolutely.
Dan.
Yeah, hey, I wanna thank him, for the Bluejacket manual though. Hey man, I know last year you done it. That thing was so outdated though. Yeah. I mean, it's some good stuff in there, of course. But to update that thing, I know you added some stuff in there, warrior toughness and stuff like that. But the fact that some of the outdated stuff that was in that thing, I'm glad that thing got updated. So hey, great job on that. And like Dumbo said before, we are excited for this conversation, and I'm always excited for leadership stuff. And you got a ton of experience, at leadership. So I can't wait to hear some of the stuff that you got to say about leadership.
Absolutely. And just to touch on it, so the Bluejackets, man, right? I'm a co-author on it. So this guy Tom Cutler, when I worked at the Naval Institute, I worked with Tom, or I worked for Tom actually. So he's been there a while. He was one of my gunner's mate, I think. I'm forgetting his source rating, but and then he commissioned, and then he ended up driving ships and being a ship driver and stuff. So he's got his name on a ton of books too at the Naval Institute, like Ship Handler's Guide and some division officer kind of stuff. And he had been the author of the Bluejackets manual for the last, 4 or 5 editions. And he's passing that baton now. So it's me, a guy, Master Chief Mark Hockala. He's a retired guy. He works up at I think he still does, at the Ceremonial Guard. And it was cool to be able to, we all divided that up, chapters. I didn't just do it all. Like, they're like, hey, Paul knows kind of this stuff. Mark's a big history guy. I appreciate history, but not a history dig it per se. So Mark took the history piece. I had done naval aviation, so I took that chapter. I'm like, okay, there's nothing in here about people, right? So I'm like, okay, planes, got it, but let's talk about a CAG and a squadron and a wing, and what the people running the flight deck and the divisions that are on an aircraft carrier, right? So it was cool to be able to get in and modernize and kind of review that thing. So again, another privilege to be, a lot of people could have the opportunity to do it, but that opportunity came across. So it really is a cool thing to be able to do.
Yeah, these are some great opportunities, right? Just to be able to like write these books, but then also in the career, be able to go on and become a Fleet Master Chief from joining the Navy as a 17-year-old in Fort Lauderdale.
Yep.
Right. So, and that's kind of where the story starts well before that, but that's kind of where the Navy journey begins. And I know at some point you were choosing between Air Force and Navy. I know Army and Marines was out of it. What made you pick Navy?
So I think I went to that recruiting office first, and I write about this in the intro. So I think it was a senior chief at the time. Obviously, you walk in a recruiting office, you don't have all the things down. But this big, tall guy walks in. He's in his summer whites, and he's got these white shoes. And I was like, man, I thought that was the coolest thing I'd seen. Right? Like that looks pretty cool. And I noticed other people had black shoes on, but this guy was in white shoes. Coming to find out, he was either a chief or a Navy chief. So he didn't talk to me. I didn't talk to him, but just that impression was like, oh, that looks pretty cool. And then they sat me down. I took an ASVAB, and I never even ended up going to the Air Force because I went into the Navy one first. It was just how it played out. And then took it, and then he gave me, I don't think he gave me a Bluejackets manual, but I remember reading about ratings, and then once the ASVAB came back, he's like, oh yeah, we got another test for you to take. Like,
yeah.
About nuclear power plants. I'm like, not a lot, but, and I wasn't rudderless, right? I was a good kid overall, but I didn't have like a sense of a life plan. So I was kind of primed to just go wherever someone encouraged me at that point. So I was like, oh, sure. You want me to take another test? I'll take another test. And then I passed that. And then they're like, the money start, $4,500. Right. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of money, like, yeah. And then I had to pick a new grading. So I remember reading like, okay, machinist mate, electronics technician. And I'm like, oh, this electrician sound like the coolest of all of them. Right. So I'm going to,
for sure.
And then you just dive in the pool and you go.
Yeah. Now I got a question about a statement about the electrician and the nuke stuff. But before that, so 17, did you graduate early, or was that just the way school was lined up?
Yeah, I think it's because my birthday's in December. So I think the way I had graduated May, so just the way it lines up with the birthday and the enrollments. I graduated on time, but I was always going to be younger for my class.
Yeah, I'm a December baby too.
Yeah.
Crazy. So the nuke stuff, right? So this is what I got to say. I think Damon probably got the same thing as me. He probably don't know this yet. But, when I first joined the Navy, a big thing was like, you nuking it, right? That's what all my conventional EMs, used to say when we overthought something or something like that, right? Now I'm on a carrier and I work with nukes, my officers, they're nukes, right? And I realized that like we weren't like over, like, well, the nuclear guys, they don't overthink. Us conventional EMs, we just underthink.
Oh, you think? Yeah, no.
we actually underthink. So like many instances, Paul, like my guys that come up to me and they be like, hey, E-Tech, is saying this. And I look at what E-Tech said. I'm like, well, E-Tech is right. So the E-Tech can come talk to me and be like, hey, senior, like, I just don't understand. Like, it has to be some kind of technical documentation for this. And I'd be like, yeah, it probably is. But like, I've never seen it. Like, we just change ballasts. It's 2 wires. He's like, no, it gotta be. And so yes, I learned a whole lot and I gained a whole lot of respect for reactor. I gained a whole lot of respect for nukes, and I'll probably never say you nuking it again. Because I think we need to start kind of thinking a little bit more to get us on the right track. So I love those guys. I love you guys, Paul. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, so there's thinkers. There's all kinds, right? Like I saw it, right? You're kind of on the spectrum nukes. And then you got like knuckle dragger nukes, right? Like, and then you got in the middle, we're all just cynical as hell, right? Like, but then I look over in the crypty community, right? And I'm like, okay, there's some of that over there too. And FCs, I see some of that there too, right? There's a lot of ratings now, like over time that very technical, very high end. And then I've seen smart people in non-nuke ratings too, right? So it's, you can't just bend it all. But yeah, we do. I think we overthink. We're taught to think about it, right? That's kind of. I don't think I was overthinking stuff before I came to the Navy, and then that new culture does teach you. That's one of the. It's kind of a double-edged sword. You know, that whole questioning attitude. That's really what it comes down, right? There's a bunch of Watson principles. It's, but man, like you're standing watching a nuclear power plant, like questioning what could go wrong, and you're trained on what could go wrong. And you saw what could go wrong in Japan, right? When the tsunami came through, that scenario, when that reactor plant, you know, you saw it on TV with explosions and meltdown, that we are trained to those scenarios. So you know how bad it could be. But then it translates into real life too. So then you're constantly thinking, what if, right? And that's not necessarily a good way to live life, just constantly worrying about what's always going to go wrong, kind of thing. So, and I do, you know, we tend to be, I think, a very cautious group, you know, when you're operating and stuff. So I think that's where it lends to that behavior of overthinkers.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I took from you guys just working with the guys now is just making sure we got, it's funny to say this, but making sure we got technical references for everything we do. Yeah. That's just the biggest thing. It's like, hey, is it like wire removal forms, right? Yep. Like all this stuff is in a GIFM. And I'm like, hey, guys, like, sirs, like you guys going places in the GIFM that I've never been before. Like we just, we just do this, you know? And electrical safety is always under the microscope, right? Well, it's been under the microscope recently for a few years. So these are things that we need. And personally, in my division, we had to implement a few things coming from reactor department that kind of make it's a thing they do called brief to chief. And we started it in my division where we kind of go over all our tech references and everything we do before our junior sailors go out and do work. So where now the chief got buy-in on a job and know that the junior sailor is going to do the job armed with the right information and tech guidance. And it's helping us. It's teaching us. It's helping us. Different places in the NSTM 300 that like that always been there, but I never saw. Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
We had to do exams on all that, and memorize and be able to write that stuff down, right? But no, I think that's great, right? Like, so yeah, I got to ask the chief, right? And there's an expectation that the chiefs have high expert power and they know their rating and stuff, but you can't know it all the time. So this kind of making the chief get back and have you brief them, like keeps the chief sharp too, right? Yeah. Like, hold on a minute, is that right? You know, and then I go and I check in the reference too. And I'm big on, if you've heard the podcast, right, you got to keep that expert power sharp. You got to constantly be, you don't have to read every manual 24 hours a day, but just pick it up, build time in every day, 20, 30 minutes, you know, dust off uniform regs, dust off MILPERS, or for that situation, a sailor is going through something like, okay, we like to solve problems with experience and medication, you know, but no, there's someone's been through that. It's probably written somewhere. So getting that reference and kind of see what it says, and you're going to probably find a solution there that you don't have to think through.
How was young Paul Kingsbury coming up in like the Navy?
Yep. So I definitely wasn't a troublemaker, right? So you're shaped by your childhood upbringing. I think that's kind of how your character's shaped, right? So I, grew up, Catholic. I was an altar boy. I was a lector, right? So I was public speaking at a very young age. My mom was on my butt, right? So I grew up, I'm a Gen X, but I didn't have, two working parents, right? So Gen X is the first generation of the latchkey generation, not all, but many. But I was raised in a traditional, my dad worked, solid blue collar. My mom stayed at home. So I kind of had that structure. And, frankly, I had a brother that was kind of a screw up with drugs and alcohol. And I saw that and what that could do. So I was like, I was growing up in South Florida. So in the 80s, so you can imagine what was available, right? So too young to go out to the bars and clubs and stuff like that. But I was seeing it, right? And hearing about the drug and the cocaine stuff and all that stuff that was big in South Florida. I always had a propensity to want to work. So I was cutting lawns and I was collecting aluminum cans, and, at 15, I got a job at Bojangles and I was working, right? And I learned a lot of life lessons.
That's the chicken? That's the fried chicken spot?
Yeah.
It was around back then?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that. I didn't know Bojangles was that. Okay.
And one of the first leaders I had shape me was a guy named Lloyd Miller at Bojangles. He was a single father. He worked there, right? And he, I worked in the back cooking. He's probably in his I'd say upper 20s, mid 30s. He drove that kitchen, right? Like, not like a tyrant, but like, hey, we got things done. But then when things were done, he would joke around, and we could, but I learned that lesson of like, take care of work, get your stuff done. So my work ethic was shaped pretty well before I got in. And like I said, I was a pretty compliant kid, growing up as a Catholic guilt guy, like you screw up and it's over, and a mom that was going to hold you accountable. So I was not a troublemaker. I wasn't seeking trouble. But at the same time, I wasn't necessarily getting like that encouragement, like, oh man, you got straight A's and B's in high school. Like, hey, let's sit down. My parents, my dad never graduated high school. My mom graduated high school. They just couldn't provide the guidance that I probably needed at the time. So, I was like looking for some direction, but fortunately I didn't have negative influences to take me down a dark path. Nor do I think if that was there, I was afraid of that, right? I was like, oh, that's going to lead to a bad place and I don't want to go there. So that Navy provided me that opportunity. So as a young sailor, I was just, yes, sir, let's get it done the best I could kind of thing. I was little back then, I was like, I think I was 113 pounds when I enlisted, so I was a little skinny kid, and like, I'd never really been out of Florida per se, like probably many young sailors. So it was, and then nuke power doesn't give you much breathing room either, right? So you get in nuke power, you get in A school, you're on very regimented study, you have hours you got to put in, and all I knew is I did not want to disappoint my parents. That was my initial motivating mindset. Like it wasn't about, I want to succeed. It was like failure of disappointing my parents. And then also the narrative of like, I don't want to go to the fleet, right? That was the thing. Because as a nuke, you knew you were going to have 2 years of school before you went to the fleet. And the fleet was this bad thing that was out there, right? And I'm like, I don't want to go to the fleet as a conventional, right? So that motivation, like, just got me going, and it doesn't, obviously now you're in the Navy, right? So now you're meeting all kinds of different people and, I'm old enough and I'm, you start drinking, not like crazy, but you meet people and you're doing parties. So I was breaking rules here and there. We weren't, we knew how not to get caught. We knew how to cover each other, but overall it was a good group of people, that were getting things done. And I think that really characterizes, I never went to NJP, I never got written up, kind of thing. So I don't have those kind of cool stories to say at the time I went to NJP.
Great. I love it.
Yeah, that's good.
So I was kind of just, it wasn't, I don't have a lot of that. I mean, I've got some great sea stories, first deployments and stuff, but as far as behavior, I was straight stick, compliant kind of sailor.
Okay.
Hey, Paul, one thing about the nukes also is that you guys stay together a lot. Yeah. Right? Because you guys are always studying and doing things like that. So you guys always stay together. So I made chief on aircraft carrier, right? So I had about 8 like nukes went through the season with me. It's like 8, I think it's like 8, right? And we did a whole lot of shit we ain't supposed to be doing, right? Like, a whole lot of shit, right? But, it made us better though. At the same time, brought us together, made us better. But I tell you, you said something about Gen X, right? Yep. And you came in the Navy where it was like, hey, get it done, right? Don't ask no questions, don't do nothing, right? And then you went through a little bit, and now it's like question attitude, like question. Did you have any challenges dealing with how you came up and how you had to lead?
Yeah, so I think, remember, the cool thing about this kind of generational thing is like, so I come in, I was adopted, so my parents were older. So I'm raised by this kind of boomer generation, right? Just respect for authority. You don't ask, you don't question. And again, growing up, and this all matters, and we see it today, but that experience of get out of the house and go, right? And just kind of learning social lessons with your peer group, right? You didn't run to mom if your feelings got hurt, right? If your feelings got hurt, your peers laughed at you, and you better suck it up and deal with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I came in. So as I think there was always an edge, so I was saying I was compliant per se, but it doesn't mean I didn't break rules to get things done, right? So I always felt myself being, I got it. Wire removal forms. There's a reason. I got it. There's an important reason. I would never violate that. But there were times, like as a chief, I made the call to hang human danger tag to protect my people. And I've talked about that before on a podcast, right? But I had to make those kind of decisions. So when you talk about procedural compliance, I was brought up under a chief's mess that was like, hey, there's a gray area, right, where you can make a decision as a chief to accept responsibility, right, and to kind of provide cover for your people, right? There's a time and a place for that, and you've got to know it. And I'll give you the sea story for me. It was as a young sailor, a chief did this for me. So I was down the propulsion plant. We were replacing the fluorescent lights, right? So they had the small ones, and they were adding like 4 bulb fixtures. So that was my job. I had to go around the plant and replace those. So I'm doing this over and over, right? Hundreds of these things. And then you had to pull fuses for those, right? And tag them. So I was doing one. I'd done this a bunch of times. I was probably getting complacent. So I pulled some fuses and I'm working on the next thing. And then they'll shut down electrical operator. We were shut down, comes by and he's like, hey, what are you doing? Like, I just lost control power for the one control system. So it means his indications, on the electric plant, he can't see certain things. And I'm like, I'm just replacing these lights. And then I realized I had pulled one of the fuses for the lighting and one of the fuses for control power, right? Yeah. So in the nuke world, that's like, okay, that's probably a critique, right? You're going to get, some pressure and all this other stuff. So I'm like, crap, right? So nukes are taught like integrity, right? So I go into, EOS and my chief's there and I'm like, oh, all right, there's Chief Fisher, right? So Arnie Fisher's his name. I'm like, hey, Chief, come here. I'm like, I screwed this up. He's like, Kingsbury, get over here, right? So does he go run off and like write me up or friggin' rip me apart or anything or like start a critique? Nope. He goes, pull that fuse and put that one back in, right? So I do that and he's like, don't ever do it again, right? And it was done. So I'm like, okay, right? So the book would say, I get written up and we do a safety tag stand down. But he knew like, hey, it's an honest mistake. And probably if he goes through that process, just the pain it inflicts on other people, just with process and friggin' stand downs and all that stuff, the cost isn't worth it, right? And this wasn't a big, major life changing thing, right? So that chief modeled to me, like he took that, he took top cover for me. And he knew when to, obviously if I had done something egregious, that killed somebody or something like that, it would have been different outcomes. So that kind of like left a big impression in my mind. I won't say that, obviously I always defaulted to like procedural compliance and following the procedure and doing things right. But that same situation came back to me when I was a young chief. I was on the Mississippi and we were getting ready to do a reactor startup and we were doing maintenance on a high pressure air compressor. Of course, they clear tags and restart. It doesn't restart. So we're like, what the heck? Right. So I'm like, what is going on here? Right. I'm like, this is a good group. I could delegate to this group. So I'm like, I flash back to that experience and I'm like, all right, if I call it, if we report this right now, and I say, hey, this thing, and we go through the process, we're going to delay the reactor startup. We're going to get a critique, right? Like, and it's going to cost. So I'm like, let me just look at some stuff first. So I had one of my electricians. I'm like, open that breaker, stand there, right? So I hung a human danger tag. I'm like, all right, you two back here, pull the panel off, right? Sure enough, they had not put the right wire where it needed to go. So back to Artie Fisher. I'm like, all right, friggin' put that wire there, put that one there, bolt it up, right? The thing that goes with this part of the sea story, though, is where this high pressure air compressor was right under the stairs that came down to the propulsion plant. So while we're doing this, I see these khakis come down right the stairs. So I'm like, okay, hold on a minute. I'm like, so I come from behind the high pressure air compressor. It's the chief engineer. So I'm like, okay. He's like, hey, Chief Kingsbury, what's going on? I'm like, hey, not much, sir. We're just wrapping this up. He's like, all right, hey, good to go. Things going good. I'm like, things are great, right? And off he goes into EOS. And I'm like, you guys wrapped up? And they're like, yep. I'm like, all right, set that breaker, restart it, good to go, right? But then I huddled them afterwards, right? I wanted to make sure, like, okay, this is your pass, right? This is not the norm. We don't do this all the time, right? But they knew, they learned, I learned, and it made the team actually stronger. And I don't think I never felt ethically bad about it. And I think it was an area where I made the right decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know if I was down in a space, like pulling, like in that first scenario, if I'm down in a space, I got to pull fuses for every single light fixture I got to change out. That's a long, like as an EM, I know how long of how tedious, of a task, that is. So all of these lessons, all of this work, all of this stuff eventually like takes you to the position of like Fleet Master Chief.
Yeah.
Right. So now, the first question I guess would have to be, I heard somewhere you said that you really still didn't know, even as a first class, that you wanted to stay in the Navy and make a whole career out of this, right?
Yep. Yeah, I was, so remember Nuke's advanced, so I made Chief in 9.5, right? So that's back in the day, as far back as the day goes. There used to be a requirement to have, you had to have 11 years time in service to be eligible, right? There wasn't this whole just anyone. And then 10% could be I think it was 10% could be selected early. So nukes, most of them are young anyhow, right? So I made it at 9.5. I was still developing and maturing, right? So you figure, I'm 27 years old. My prefrontal cortex has just finally fully developed. My decision-making regulator has finally developed, right? But I wasn't bought in. I was just kind of, again, I came into work, I did my thing. I had done one reenlistment already, and I did that primarily. Obviously, the bonus was a big part of it. But back then, you could reenlist to get off your first shore duty tour at 3 years and then go be a prototype instructor. And I knew I'd started to already learn like, oh, this training and education thing is where I thrive, right? I can operate, but it's not my thing, right? I'm like anxious and I'm like, I don't like bells and whistles and alarms going off and I get gauge lock. So my place was like, but, I know when I train and educate my teams, right? I just had an affinity to just do this hands-on training and stuff. So I was like, I want to go back to prototype and be an instructor. So I went up there, did that thing. But I'm telling you, it was just day by day. Let's just get it done. I wasn't a career person. I made Chief on the Mississippi, and then I got to Enterprise. And I remember like a year out, they kind of schedule your reenlistment. I was like, I think I'm going to reenlist, but I still, at 10, 11 years, I still wasn't on any path thinking anything bigger than day to day at that point. I think I mentioned in one episode of a podcast, I had the commanding officer on the Mississippi when I checked out as a young chief tell me like, oh yeah, I can see you're going to be a command master chief one day. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. Thanks. Got to roll. And then one day, I'm telling you, it was like, I lost track of this whole scheduled, or I didn't know I had scheduled it, but the career counselor calls me from the engineering department and goes, all right, hey, you ready for the reenlistment tomorrow? I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, oh yeah, remember we scheduled. I'm like, all right, I guess I'm reenlisting. That was kind of what the decision was, right? I was set up. I was divorced at the time. I had 2 kids, right? And there wasn't at the time, there wasn't a lot of outside knowledge as there is today, or I think there is, of like, hey, transition assistance and like, hey, there was no skill bridge. There was no, hire our heroes or any of these organizations that were teaching you. All you knew was the Navy and I knew there were nuclear power plants out there I could work in, but I had these 2 young kids, they were in Virginia and I'm like, okay, this kind of works, right? So I can get a tour here. I can be by my kids. I keep stability. But other than that, that was kind of the kind of guiding motivation for me at the time. But I did try to just do my best every day, and keep my knowledge sharp and, try to focus on my people the best I could. And then the rest just kind of was kind of playing out on its own, for lack of a better term.
So does it play all the way out to becoming a fleet master chief?
I think so for the most part. So the first decision point comes, all right, you're chief. So I'm a chief, I'm a senior, and I'm like, all right, now do I go LDO warrant? Like that opportunity. And I'm watching other nukes go through the LDO thing, right? And I'm talking to some senior LDOs, some 06s and 05s, and they're like, oh man, this would be good for you. But then I had a lot of mass chiefs, I draft these packages like LDO. I'm like, okay, I'm going to put a package in, and you get it going. And I'd pass these, and these mass chiefs would be like, telling you, Paul, you'll make a much better mass chief than you'll make an LDO. And that's where the Navy needs you. Right. And then I get ready to put the package in. I'm like, it just doesn't feel right. Right. I don't know, So finally I was like, nope. I figured out, no, I want to be a command mass chief. Right. So around that time as a senior chief, I realized, seeing what you could do, shaping policies, I was starting to get into that departmental LCPO kind of level of leadership where it's like, okay, I'm a good technical nuke and I know enough, but this is where I think it's cool, making sure that the career counselor has cover to do the guidance that they need, right? And they're just as equally important to the team as the, EM LCPO and RT LCPO, right? And just kind of my affinity took me that way. That was the first decision. Like, you got to go, okay, I'm going to be a command mass chief. And the other thing it was going to give me was some career, not flexibility, but it was going to give me some diversity of career options, right? So as a nuke, it was going to be carrier to prototype, and there was more of the Navy I wanted to see, right? I had never gotten back to Florida. I'm like, hey, I wanted an opportunity to go back and be stationed in Florida again. And then I applied, but you got to take steps, right? First, you got to make senior chief. So the first thing was like, all right, let me just be a good nuke. And then I wasn't chasing it though. It was weird. I remember being a chief and like on the carrier, I was on Enterprise at the time. And I had this one senior chief. He was like, you got to get your air warfare done. I'm like, if air warfare is the thing that gets me selected as senior chief, then I don't deserve to be senior chief, right? I'm like, nope. So I refused to do it. I'm like, no, I should get selected as senior chief based on my merit as being a good nuke chief, right? My quals, my division accomplishments, and take care of nuke business. So I got advanced to senior chief, and then I'm like, okay, now I'll get warfare because I want to do it, right? So, kind of that was my approach. And then, you got people setting you up, right? And so they saw, I had affinity. I had a prototype tour. Reactor training was a billet that is really good for nukes to do, right? So you're running all the reactor training and stuff, and it's, at least as a senior chief, that sets you up pretty good for mass chief. But once I put that package in for CMC, I didn't get selected the first year. And again, this is kind of was my, I think I was getting very principled at the point, but I had my CMC at the time on the Ronald Reagan was like, hey, they're getting ready to convene for the board and stuff. And he was going to be on the board. He ended up being a fleet mass chief at Land Fleet. So I went over and I had his endorsement. He was like, hey, they're looking for would you be interested in going to the Army Senior Enlisted Academy as the Navy's rep there? He's like, hey, if you do that, I know I can get you selected in the program. I'm like, all right, well, let me think about it. I'm like, no, I don't want to go get selected. I'm not going in the command mass chief program to go to Texas and to an Army command. I'm like, no, I'll take my chances, and I just want to be, I want to be in the fleet. So of course I didn't get selected the first time, but that's okay, right? So I reapplied and then got selected. And then from there, not much choice. I thought I was going to Florida. I ended up in Japan. And then a lot of it comes down to timing once you're in the command mass chief program, right? So you can have all these kind of, I want to be a force this and a fleet that, right? Those billets, you got to time. That billet's either open or it's not when you're coming up for orders, right? Like, they don't go, hey, Paul, like on your first tour as a ship CMC, you'd be a great fleet mass chief, and then they put you in the package, right? That doesn't work that way. So it came down to like, you get to that 2.5 year point on that first tour, and now like, okay, now I'm looking. We had a thing called the hot sheet. I don't know if they have it anymore. It would list all the billets that are coming open in your transfer. So then you can kind of shop. and go, okay, this is kind of interesting and this is interesting. But I still wasn't like, I'm going to go be the MCPON. That was not in my thinking.
Mm-hmm. So you do eventually become a fleet master chief.
Yeah.
And you also, so one thing that you just said, I think a lot of people did think that, like, you do get kind of put into the packet to be a 4-star fleet based off your first like CMC tour. I think a lot of people do think that, like, hey, you start early because this was going to put you in a trajectory. Yep. My question is, because I know a lot of sellers don't know the differences between this. What's the differences between Force Master Chiefs and Fleet Master Chiefs?
Yeah. So really, it's the echelon you're working at. So Force Master Chief is going to be working at the TICOM level. So instead of Force Master Chief, you could call it the TICOM Master Chief. Like, so they're going to be for a type command. So Air Lant, Air 4, Surf Lant, Surf 4, CNIC, right, which is the shore. Mm-hmm. Navy Expeditionary Command, SEALs have a Force Master Chief. So you're representing your warfare community at the Force Master Chief level. At the Fleet Master Chief level, it's kind of interesting. Now you're at the Echelon level with 4-star level, but now you've got bigger pieces, right? So those TIE commanders on the Atlantic side reported to Fleet Forces, right? So you had Air Lant, Surf Lant, all the East Coast stuff, and Navy Expeditionary Combat Command reported to my boss. And then also at the time, I think it's been restructured now, CTF 80, which is now Second Fleet again. That was an operational hat, right? So those operational CMCs kind of fell under the purview. So it's less about just surface ships or aviation squadrons. And now you've got this diverse set that you've got to understand and influence. So I had to know naval aviation. I had to know surface. Obviously, I was never going to be an NECC. I didn't have that background, but I had a Force Master Chief that was in my, in our sphere of influence that could tell me everything I needed to know and get me smart on that. So that's the difference. And then there used to only be 2, right? It was Atlantic and Pacific. And then, you ended up with a Europe version. Mm-hmm. So that one's a little different. And then you got the, basically MCPON used to have this role as the advisor to Chief of Naval Personnel, but then I forget how long ago that 4th Fleet Master Chief position was stood up for, the Chief of Naval Personnel, or MPT&E, if that's what it's still called, Manpower, Personnel Training and Equipping. Mm-hmm. And then also any person who's selected to be a combatant commander, senior enlisted leader. So if I get selected to go to UCOM as that, 4 stars, senior enlisted leader, and I'm a Navy person, I get the Fleet Master Chief title. So that one's unique as well. So, but that's the biggest way to think about Force and Fleet Master Chiefs, the difference between them. If that makes sense. Does that make sense how I've kind of broken it out?
Yeah, it makes sense. So I got a quick question. Because I always find these things funny. If I'm a Fleet Master Chief and I go visit a ship and the junior seller asks me if I could change something, right? So I'm a Fleet Master Chief, I go visit a ship, I'm talking to the crew. And we make sellers raise their hand and the junior seller say, hey, this is happening in the Navy. Can you fix it, Fleet? What's the chances that the Fleet Master Chief could actually fix that?
So this is where you get into the real world, right? How this stuff really works, right? And this is where it gets to, I talk about this a lot. So the higher you move up, your ability to influence things instantaneously just rapidly erodes. Okay. For example, all right, whatever this issue is. Okay, let me take that back. So first of all, the first thing I'm going to ask, is this something that's within the realm of the TICOM to fix, right? Or is it within the realm, is it a ship policy? So if it's a ship policy, I'm not doing anything with it. I'm going to be like, CMC, you got that? He's like, yeah, I got that, right? Because you see that at all hands calls, like people just bring it all up, right? If they can just get a platform to just get it, like my request shit, and like okay, you just affirm like, hey, that's a chain of command thing, right? But you start getting, next step could be like, surface warfare quals. If they had an issue with, okay, well, let's talk about that. So then I take that, I write it down, and then I may not have a conversation with one thing, but if I start hearing, I get that thing, then I'm going to take it like, all right, who else feels that way? So I'm going to take that, at least I would. Hey, who else feels that way about that thing? And if I see the hands go up, I'm like, okay, now I got a good pulse, right? I'm not just going to take this one person's input. And then I'm going to be like, all right, if I hit another ship or two, I'm going to ask that question proactively. Like, hey, I heard over here about this. What do y'all think? Like the more hands go up, go to the next ship. All right, now I've got, a couple data points here that show like, okay, this is a dissatisfier. This is an issue. Or another thing I would do if I heard something like that, an all hand call, I used to like to stitch in some walking around time, right? Where I would get into workspaces and see what they were doing in the workspace and then ask these one-offs like, hey, tell me about this thing. And you'd get the real deep dive like, oh yeah, here's why it's BS, or here's why it needs to be adjusted. So I'm collecting all this feedback. And if it's at the TICOM level, then I'm going to huddle that force master and go, hey, I'm hearing a lot. Are you here? He's like, yeah, I'm hearing that too. So it may be what I'm hearing validates what they're hearing already, and they're already moving on it. And I'm like, well, hey, you need to push that info out so people know you're moving on it, kind of thing. Or you make them aware. But if it's that warfare program, right, they don't work for me. That force master chief works for their admiral. So I can try to influence that admiral, but there's no way I'm going to the 4-star admiral and going, hey, you need to tell that Sir Fort, he's not going to do it. Right. He's not going to go man, make warfare quals mandatory, right? They're going to protect that commander's authority. So really my influence at this point, and these are positions of influence, right? I've got to make the case on behalf of the sailors. And most of the times, right, those master chiefs and those commanders are going to get it. If it's a bigger policy, right, we get into like manning issues and things like that. Now you're really getting into the machine. So I can't just shit people, right, and make them like, oh, here you go, you're manned, right? So I'm like, I had to learn at Fleet Forces, right? There's an N1. And that N1 has a policy on how they, across the Navy, how they prioritize manning, right? So the first thing I had to learn was like, holy crap, no one ever taught me this. So now I got to understand this, right? So I had to take time to learn the machine, right? And how it works and how it prioritizes, I've got, demand signal for, I got 100 Y&C billets across the fleet, but guess what? I only have 25 wrecks and rollers. So who's going to get those 25 Y&Cs across the Navy, right? There's a process to who gets that. Most people don't get that. And I didn't even understand it till I was at the fleet master chief level. And then it gets into, well, how do we get more people? Well, now I'm into the bigger budgeting thing, right? So now the Navy at large, and the Secretary of the Navy, by the way, right? It's not just the CNO makes the calls. The CNO works for the Secretary of the Navy, and there are several undersecretaries of the Navy as well with their staffs, and they're all driving their own agendas, right? And then above that is Congress and the political level, and they're all making decisions on money and things like that. So now you're in this world of politics and big staff stuff, and you're just trying to help create a demand signal for these kind of things, right? And hope, because remember, it's not just people. Their money needs to go towards ships and maintenance, and money needs to go towards the shore side, right? And money needs to go to buying new people. So there's a lot of competition for X amount of dollars, and you learn real quick, like, okay, I can't just make these things happen, right? So it gets very frustrating the higher you get up to realize, some sailors go, hey, friggin', why are we doing hands in pockets? You would think something like that's easy to change, right? As it just finally did. Amen, But you get into different people protect their, like you get in these higher staffs, uniform matters, right? Like there's civilians on these staff that protect their stuff, right? They don't want to change. So now I'm like, okay, now I'm up against that, right? Now I got to maybe go to my boss and try to get them to convince them, right? So it gets you have a lot of good people at that level that want to try to help get a lot of things done, but there's so many bureaucratic obstacles to your influence. It can get very frustrating. I'm not saying you can't get things done, but it takes a lot of time. In some cases, you need to make things a requirement, right? because if it's not a requirement, it doesn't get money. So the first thing I got to do is I got to convince people to make this a requirement. And that can take 2 or 3 years. And by the time I'm done, I have to hand that baton off. And hopefully someone coming behind me feels the same way. Right.
Right.
So I'm telling you, that's the real that, oh, it's the fleet master chief. Yeah. Okay. But in the big machine, like when you're talking about, and it's just not the CNO, right? The whole OpNav staff, right? You got that flag wardroom, you've got their staff. That thing is constantly turning over. So one of the barriers to progress is like this constant turnover of leadership. So you could get, an admiral or whatever's like, yeah, let's do it. Or you start getting things going, bam, 3 years, they're out. They're retired. In comes the new admiral, new staff, new priorities. Whoosh, that moves down. So now you got to start all over again. So I think that's why you see sometimes the MCPONs will take on these things that they know they can influence. Like, well, I'll just adjust initiation guidance because at least that's within my control, right? I can make that happen. I can stroke some memos out, right? Because that doesn't take 5 years of creating a requirement and going up against the bureaucracy and fighting those barriers. They'll do it, but it is very complicated at that level.
Yeah, because I guess at the end of all this, we still under civilians and it's still money. Involved.
It is, right?
At the end of all of this.
Yeah.
Civilian-run military, right? People don't forget who runs the military, right? The officers follow the orders of the civilians, not the other way around.
That hurt me, damn it. That hurt me.
I know. That cut deep.
Yep. Some of those civilians, right? SES, Senior Executive Service, they have the same kind of gravitas as an admiral, but they're civilians.
Right.
And they have a lot of, they stay there a long time, right? And that's good and it can be bad, right? But they have, like when I was at Fleet Forces, Mark Honecker was the executive director. Great guy, most senior SES that was in the service. I could go down, I made a point to have lunch with him at least once a month. He knew back 10 commanders, why decisions were made, what politics. So if I was like, hey, we need to kind of adjust a certain thing, or hey, I'm getting feedback on this, he was a great source of knowledge of like how things got in the way, right? He knew that commander in many cases better than I did. Cause one of the other differences that happens is the higher you go up, that front office staff in front of that admiral, if you've ever seen it, right, it grows, right? So there's a lot more gatekeepers. So you don't get that just walk in the captain's office and demand, like, oh, we need to change this. Those days are over, right? You get time with the boss, you got to schedule it. You're in the meetings with him and you can say your thing, but it's way different than it is at the tactical level where you can just say your piece, or you can go down to the department head and go, hey, you're screwing this up. And they're like, oh crap, Master Chief, thanks. Or you go to the XO, right? Again, that kind of direct, they'll listen to you, but there are so many other things, right? My boss was talking to the CNO, right? My boss had a lot of other things on his mind than some of the things I had on mine, right? And that staff, right, had flag officers and for department heads, right, with big staff, right? So it gets very complicated. And unfortunately, you don't learn that till you're in the seat. And then you're like, oh crap, I gotta, who are these people, right? Like, where do I go to wield influence? What are the meetings I've got to be in, right? So I think that's why you see this behavior. Well, I'm just going to go run around the fleet and take selfies and, give good talks. No, your actual value is to be in those meetings, right? Representing, that enlisted constituency. And we are, but I think we're slowly improving, but we're definitely not educated to the level we need to be. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to update the Chief Petty Officer's Guide to start to build all that content in about, hey, you go step on a flag staff. It is a different world from being a unit level CMC, and you got to be prepared for it to be effective as you can. They eventually end up, there's some effectiveness, but there's some CMCs that get in that job and they just get sidelined, right? They don't know how to act. They come out too strong, right? They say things, right? And then they just get neutralized, and you can just get neutralized, believe it or not.
Yeah, well, appreciate the book because a lot of us, it's like the Peter Principle thing where like a lot of us don't really know what the hell we doing until we get into the next spot anyway.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? What you got, Damon?
So, hey, Paul, 31 years, right? So let's talk a little bit about the balance of the Navy and your personal life. I know you said you had two. You got two kids. Or you got more.
Oh, I got more. Yeah. So
more, okay.
Balance will be something we talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got 4 kids total, right?
Okay.
2 ex-wives. I'm married my 3rd time, and I've got 3 stepkids, right? So, balance. Yeah. I don't know if it was, I think I felt I was balanced as balanced as I could be, cause you're going to deploy, right? My first marriage wasn't that long, so there wasn't a lot of deploying time together. My second marriage was longer. So she got it. She understood it, right? She was good. So I don't think it was balanced. It was more just kind of my inability to invest where I needed to, and then just personal stuff, at that point. I tried the best I could. It's, when you're on SEAL duty, you're going to deploy and you just got to spend the time you've got. But when you're at the command master chief level, that phone is constantly there. You got to just check the emails, right? I made a point the best I could to kind of turn it off. But I don't know. I just was always grabbing at that phone and emails were constantly coming in. But that wasn't, I don't recall it ever being, that being like, you're always on your phone, and that's a problem. I think, if you have that conversation and you're married and your partner or spouse, if you communicate like, hey, here's the expectation. So I knew going in the command master chief program, we had that discussion up front, like, hey, we're going to get worldwide assignable. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. My wife at the time was from Norfolk, her family was here, but, she knew like, okay, and sure enough, first tour, we're going to Japan. So, and that stuff does put pressure, right, on relationship, and you got to be mindful of it. But I don't think I ever felt out of balance per se, within the expectations of the job. I would take leave, right? So I was never a rack your leave up kind of person. Maybe earlier on in my career I was, but then I learned like, okay, let me find 2 holidays that have, long weekends, and then I'm going to take 5 days leave in between. So for 5 days, I can get 9 days off, and I'm going to do that once a quarter. And when I do that, I'm still gaining 2.5 days a month. So I'm still going to end up with a positive leave balance at the end of the year, but then I'm going to get time off constantly. And I think that was a big thing that was okay for me to signal like, hey, it's okay to let someone step in for a week. Shit's not going to fall apart. It's okay. It gives them an opportunity to learn. And I got comfortable with that. I mean, you're still connected with your phone and stuff, but I don't know if I struggled more with, I would say not family balance, but like mental balance, right? Like just constant anxiety, a constant feeling of and some of that I think was my nuke power training, like what's going to happen next? Where's the next shoe coming in? And then frankly, at the command master chief level, as you move up, you're probably feeling it, right? A senior chief level, like you take on, you're now responsible for more, right? So that weight comes in, it slowly builds and builds. So as a command master chief, now everything, you're not just taking on your own personal stress, but you take on your commanding officer stress too. If there's angst in the chief's mess, that you're feeling that, you're taking that on as well. So I think I did for the month. I never had any kind of crazy big breakdowns or never lost my shit anywhere. I always made sure to exercise. I was always a fan of, honestly, if I could get it, I always encouraged like, hey, I was never a command master chief that's like, during working hours, the chief's mess is friggin' off limits. I'm like, I need chiefs to grab naps when they need to, right? I was kind of like, we're all adults here. If you need to come in here, grab coffee, grab something to eat, grab a nap, grab on the computer, if your stuff's done, it's done. But when the inspections come along, we're gonna know if your stuff's good or not, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's the rubber to the road right there.
Yeah, right. I think overall, even now, I always felt I was able to get plates spinning I'm a visual guy, right? So plates spinning, and then just be able to either delegate someone to the right person to keep that plate spinning for me, or to come back on frequent intervals and check on it. So I was able to be very efficient with my time. Like, okay, no, I think I can do 4 or 5 things and get these 5 things going instead of doing them like one at a time and it taking forever or whatever. And I always had people, truth tellers, who were like, all right, you got too much going, right? You're bringing too much now. Like, because I can bring a lot of energy into the organization, like a lot of torque. But you got to make sure you don't bring too much in, right? People can only handle so much. So if I was bringing too much in, they would tell me, okay, that's enough. Kind of like, we got all we can handle. All right, got it. Let's hold. So it's important to do it, right? It's important to have those conversations with a partner, spouse, whatever it is. It's just with any relationship, right? It's just not because you're in the Navy. There's people like doctors, neurosurgeons and stuff that do high end pressure stuff, right? They're always on call and stuff. Those ER doctors, they're under a lot of stress. Pilots that leave home all the time. I think it's that same. You got to communicate at home, and if that's not there, I don't care what job you got, that whole relationship's gonna fall apart.
Yeah. And then you always got to deal with, she might change her mind. You know what I mean? Like we talked about, I've been talking worldwide assignable for the last 4 some years, right?
Yeah.
And this like an exclusive, kind of exclusive for the listeners, right? I've been talking worldwide assignable for the last 4 some years, right? Me and Angeline was looking at these orders we going to talk about it, like, I think later or whatever, but me and Angeline was looking at these command senior chief orders.
Yep.
And her number one and their only choice was in Dogger, Virginia, close to where I live. Like, not even everything else. San Diego, everywhere else is like, no, I don't like this one. No, I don't like this one. No, no, not this one. I'm like, yo, baby, you not, like I said, like, worldwide assignment. Not ready at all. You know what I mean? So we going through that too.
Yeah. The question. So, let me build on that point real fast. So back in the day again, right? I always say back in the day because everyone says back in the day because it's as far back. They think 2000 was back in the day. I'm like, no, let's go back to the Civil War. That's back in the day, right? Like, first ironclad ships and guys, shooting at each other face to face. That's back in the day. So here I am. I'm selected as a command master chief. I'm like, all right. So number one, because I was a go-getter, I had gone to the Senior Enlisted Academy as a senior chief, right? Because I'm like, no, I want to go to the Senior Enlisted Academy and kind of, this is cool. You had to apply back then, right? You had to apply and get selected to go twice a year. They selected command senior or selected people to go to the Senior Enlisted Academy. It wasn't like you got to go as a requirement or you don't get advanced. It's a privilege to go and you get selected to go because of your leadership portfolio. So I go, I ended up going to the Air Force one, which was cool. So I learned about different service leadership and got to start to see that other stuff and gain appreciation for that. But then when it comes time, you're selected as command master chief. Guess what? If you back then, if you hadn't gone to the SCA, you went to the Senior Enlisted Academy first. So all the people selected who went to the Senior Enlisted Academy already got to go. They were going to the high demand billets. Right. So here I am. I'm going to go to Florida. Right. I'm like, yes, I'm selected. I'm waiting to see those juicy orders to like Mayport or Pensacola or something, wherever I was going to go. I'm going to get back to Florida. 4 billets. Right. Sasebo, JA. I'm like, oh, 4 billets in Jacksonville. Okay, cool. I'm like, hold on. I'm like, there's no surface ships in Jacksonville. Oh crap. Sasebo. At Sugi, I'm like, crap, they want me to go to Japan, right? So I'm like, I go to my wife and I'm like, they want us to go to Japan. She's like, I'm not going to Japan. I'm like, well, okay. So I call my buddy Glenn Mallow. I don't know if you know Glenn. So he was a nuke electrician, right? And he was kind of like 2 years ahead of me on track, and we took kind of the same path. He was an ET, I was a nuke or an EM. So he got in the program 2 years before me. So I call Glenn. I'm like, hey, man. He's like, no, just wait him out. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to wait him out. Right. So I didn't even respond to the detailer. I'm like, blow him off. Right. So a week later, bam. Hey, Paul, I need you to pick one of these. I'm like, nope, I'd blow them off. Right? I'm like, no, I'm just glad to just stay silent and someone will take those billets. So then 2 days later, an email, hey, Paul, I need you to select, and CC'd as the Force Mass Chief and the Fleet Mass Chief for Pac Fleet, right? So I'm like, okay, now you bring the pressure tactics, right? So like, okay, I guess I'm going to Japan. And then my wife at the time was like, all right, well, like, we'll make the best of it. You know what I mean? We'd never been overseas, right? I was a Norfolk nuke carrier guy, done that cruiser, but that's an example of, worldwide assignability. Be careful what you ask for because it's coming.
It changes quick. When did you get into liberal arts? Was this before the Navy? Was this during the Navy?
Yeah. So it was, it's really called liberal studies. So back in and this is important to talk about this because, again, the Navy college thing has changed so much, right? The ability for sailors to get college and the different avenues they have to do it weren't available. So I had gone through Nuke Power School. There was no college credit for that initially back then, right? It's like and Nuke Power School is associate's degree level math and physics and all that, right? It's stuff you would take in your first couple of years of college, but you're doing it in 6 months, right? It's all compressed in there. Reactor physics, chemistry, radiological controls, all this kind of, heat transfer, fluid flow. So I had that stuff. So you could do CLEP exams, right? So when I was a prototype instructor, I'm like, hey, I want to get my degree. That was kind of my next thing. Because I was starting to think like, I'm a prototype, I'm going to get my degree, and then I'm going to get qualified watch supervisor. And then the plan was get out of the Navy and go operate a nuclear power plant, right? And then, like I said, my first wife at the time, we ended up getting separated. So then your life changes and you got to make different decisions. But there was there was some Navy college. So I did start to pick a college class here or there. I went to Adirondack Community College up there in upstate New York for a couple classes. Got some psychology. I started picking around, but a lot of it was like just CLEP exams and things like that. And then I went back to ship and I had to take a break. And then Navy college programs started to evolve a bit. So then they gave us, credits for Nuke Power School, 30 credits. So most of that was able to go to that Associates of Science that I got to TCC. So with the work I'd done with CLEP exams and some of the other college work, I was able to finally stitch it all together with that associate's degree at TCC. And then, I went, where was it? I was on the Juno at that point, my first CMC tour, right out to sea. And I'm like, man, I want to get my bachelor's. So I need an option that's, remote study kind of thing. And Excelsior provide that opportunity. And I had taken so many different courses. So I had this engineering background. I had a lot of psychology. Yeah. And at the time I was interested in history and I was studying a lot of history. So this liberal studies degree allowed me to kind of put that all together, which was cool to me because I wasn't forced to just go into one stovepipe. And I think it diversified my learning across a lot of different things. So that's how I ended up doing that.
How do you go from there to the Naval Institute press reaching out about the CPO guide?
Oh, yeah. So that starts, writing starts at the Naval Safety Center. So now I'm the Command Master Chief of the Naval Center. So at this point, I've done the Juno. I've been at VFA 211 as a squadron CMC. I've gone to Guam as a Region Master Chief. I've been a Region Master Chief in Japan. And I come back and I originally had orders to go to what was NETSI N1. So it would have been the Command Master Chief working for the Admiral in charge of all the schoolhouses, right? So I was like, okay, I want to be able to shape the training pipeline. But then they downgraded that billet to an 06. So that, I had orders and that billet went away. We were already packed up, ready to PCS. So we were going to Norfolk and my billet went away. So I'm like, oh crap. And unfortunately, the Safety Center billet came open. I had a heavy nuke background, right? Risk management. So I'm like, all right, let's go see what we can do there. So that worked out. So as you guys see, right? And I think maybe you don't see it as much at the level, but typically when you're on a flag staff, you'll meet daily at the lower flag staff. You're going to meet like the commander, the deputy. There's usually a civilian executive director, and then we'll huddle together. So we'd have these talks, and then I would spin off with the deputy, and we'd say like, okay, how do we work? Or with the deputy and the executive director, and what do we need to do to kind of get done what the boss is thinking kind of deal. And then sometime Glenn Butler at the time, he was a Marine Corps colonel. He was the deputy commander for the safety center. We just grabbed coffee and had these shoot the shits, right? Like, solving all the Navy's problems, right? Bitching about stuff and just like, okay. He's like, hey, have you ever thought of writing this stuff down? He's like, he saw how I would write emails, and I was getting this feedback all along from commanding, like, man, you write really powerful emails and they're really persuasive, right? And I learned as a young command master chief, like, how to use emails and language in emails and CC line on who it went to persuade policy, right? Or to at least tee up something controversial and then give it time to marinate and then follow up with a meeting. So I was already getting feedback, and I was writing in base newspapers when I was in Guam. So I kind of had this affinity towards writing. So Glenn was like, hey, have you ever thought of writing for Proceedings magazine? I'm like, okay, what's Proceedings magazine? I had never heard of the Naval Institute. So once he said, hey, you can, and they pay you, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, I can get paid to write? Sure, let's go. So I submitted an article. The first one was too long. It was the article that actually went into Joint Forces Quarterly about harnessing the influence of senior enlisted leaders. They came back, the editorial board came back and said, hey, if you can cut it down, we'll publish it, but it's 3,500 words and we don't have space for it in our magazine. So I was like, all right, put that to the side. And then the nuke power cheating thing happened down in South Carolina, where like 28 nuke chiefs got caught taking exam material home, and right. So I'm like, all right, got it. That's bad, but there's a reason these good people are doing this, right? So I wrote this article about normalized deviance and why people make these decisions. When they got a lot of things to do, they start taking risk, right? And kind of wrote this article, and it got published. So I'm like, okay. And then I got a lot of good feedback on it. And then that encouraged me, like, okay, I started writing more. And then, essay contest, I can win $2,000, $3,000, $5,000. So you win a couple contests, like some $3,000 checks roll in. You're like, okay, cool, right? So then, because I was a fleet master chief, I'm writing, I'm good at it, I'm bringing up some relevant stuff. Fred Rainbow, who was the editor in chief, next step is like, hey, we'd like to, to invite you onto our editorial board. So now you're on the board, and all the articles that come in, you're on the decision-making body. Like, okay, that's relevant. That's not relevant. Like, hey, this is a good article, but it needs some work. So, I did that for a year. And then while I was on that, that's when Pete Daly, the CEO at the time, was like, hey, reached out and said, got me on a call and said, you write well. We want to update the Chief Petty Officer's Guide. We've approached several different authors. They've either started it and never finished it, or they've said no. Would you be willing to update it? And that's how I went on that journey. I had already been writing articles about the Chief's Mess, so I had a lot of content. I was in the mix with what was going on with leadership development changes. I had done some work, updating initiation, and I had my own opinions of where the Chief's Mess was kind of going, where I think, or building in content like no one had ever talked about or written it down. Okay, train your division officer, but what the hell does that mean? Right? Like, how do you do it? How do you measure your effectiveness training a division officer? Like, do you think about this, or do you just sit there and bring him in the office and go, sit down, sir, like sign this? And what does that all mean? So no one, I thought we needed to write that stuff down, right? And to at least start to build that. Goatlocker.org is out there, right? But it's just these anecdotes. It's all these kind of fairy tale things and these, quips and like, sit down, sir, I'll tell you how it goes. It's like, okay, got it. But, like, there's sometimes that officer knows more than you do about some stuff there, by the way, Chief. Right. And so that's where the whole writing thing took off. And then how I got in the Chief Petty Officer's Guide. And then about a year out, they're like, all right, we want to open the aperture at the Naval Institute to enlisted audience and attract more members. So they offered the job to me to do outreach for them.
When you wrote the Chief Petty Officer Guide, did you get, it's two parts. The first is how'd you feel about the offer? Were you excited? That's the first part. But then the second part of it is, anybody get like jealous of you having that opportunity, or did you get any backlash from that?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I was like given that opportunity to shape that. So I wasn't starting from scratch, right? I had the original version. So the original version was built, like I said, Mick Hagen was there in the time. And I remember this as a young chief. There was it came out, there was a 4, we didn't have mission, vision, guide, and principles of Joe Camp at that point. It was like these 4 things the chief should be doing, like communicating, supporting. And there were 4 major lines of effort. So that first edition of the guide is built around those 4 lines of effort. So there was a lot of good content already in there, but there was a whole section that was chief uniforms. I'm like, well, why is this in here? This is in uniform regs, right? This is a waste of space, right? So I'm like, I'm like, okay, just from the perspective of cleaning it up, I'm like, oh yeah. So I was excited because, like I said, I would travel. I'd be on airplanes. I'd be just journaling and writing stuff down. And I'm like, oh man, I got a great section that, we need to have this written down. And like, I got something to say about this. So yeah, I was hyped up to write it. They gave you a year to write it. So I was able to build it in. It would have taken a lot less, but because they didn't have any Word documents, I had to basically regenerate. I had to take sections of that book and rewrite it physically and then reorganize it, right? So that's what took a lot of time. This 3rd edition I already had the Word doc. They just sent me the Word documents and, it took a lot less time. But so jealousy, I don't think so. The only thing I've ever seen is, so remember, this is not my book, right? You get royalties for it, but it's not, you're not writing these books for money, right? So I learned that from Fred Rainbow. Like, you don't get rich, writing books, and that's not what it's about. But I still I'm like, hey, I put a year into this. I think it's good content. I want to raise awareness of it. So, I was comfortable on social media. So I would start posting on social media about stuff. And I remember dropping something in once in one of these Mass Chief closed pages. And that's the most I've ever got. Like, oh yeah, just kind of some blowback from that. Like, oh, this guy's just out trying to friggin' make money and sell books off the cheese mess. I'm like, I don't make money, right? Like, I make a very, Naval Institute makes 95% off the sales of the book. So that was the only kind of thing I ever, got blowback. And I'm like, meanwhile, I turn around, I look around, I see these chiefs making money off swag and t-shirts, and no one's giving them shit about that. But I write a book that's supposed to invest in the professional development of the cheese mess, and now you're giving me grief, right? So I'm like, okay, what's this really about, right? But that's it. Other than that, it's really been low awareness. I don't think the Naval Institute markets that enough. They weren't ever able to.
Not at all.
They weren't able to get it. One of my frustrations was like, hey, get the thing in the Navy Exchange, right? But the Navy Exchange, right? There's a business to this, right? So they want margins on the book and the cost has to be right. So the Naval Institute and the Navy Exchange could never get the thing right with the price. So some of the Navy exchanges do sell it. But most of the time you just got to know about it and order it off the Naval Institute kind of thing. But other than that, it's always been relatively good feedback. And then always knowing like, hey, this isn't, again, yeah, I wrote it, but I don't know everything about everything. I try to write in a way that's like, hey, I'm going to present some approaches, present some kind of ways that I think you think about it, but you see those questions. This is really for you to assess, or you and your mess to have a conversation and figure out what's right for you and your cheese mess. So that's the approach I took.
Yeah, I honestly feel like this book should be kind of pushed out at least every chief season in the exchange, places like that, right? You should be able to pick this book up. In my opinion, you should be able to pick this book up every chief season when we're doing our uniforms. When we're going to get uniforms and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's the solution. I think you're just like boot camp, right? The Bluejackets manual.
Right.
The sailor, you pay for that as a sailor, but it goes into your initial sea bag allowance with all your other uniforms and your sneakers and your toiletry. That whole thing they give you. Bluejackets manual is a piece of that. But again, I try to help the Naval Institute figure those things out where I can. But Cutlass Podcast came out of that too, as a way to raise awareness. Like, okay, there's a book, but there's so much more to talk about. Because when you write a book, you're given a word limit, right? You're not just like, write it. Nor does anyone want to pick up an 800-page book, kind kind of thing. So I'm like, all right, let's get the podcast and let's add some real world experience and context to the content in the guide. And CPO guide has, when I was at the Naval Institute, I was able to get them to do promotions around the CPO birthday and discount promotions during initiation. But once I left there, I don't think they've been doing much of that. But it's out there.
Has there been any talks about like doing audiobook versions of these?
So there is a new person there at Naval Institute. They've got a new CEO now. So that is something I've brought back is like, hey, we got to have these digital, right? They got to have not just audio, but digital versions of these too that you can download on Kindle and things like that. So that is a follow-up discussion I'm going to have with them now that the manuscript submitted to do the audio version. Because I have been asked that, like, hey, can we have the audio version? I'm like, well, Naval Institute doesn't have that yet. I think they're starting to get into that space, though.
Yeah. Would you narrate it?
I don't know how that works. I could. That's... I wouldn't commit to something I'm not well. I don't know. That's a lot of talking, right? So I'm like,
you go to the studio, like for like 3 months straight or something and record different.
And my job keeps me like, I've heard people going in their closet to do their own audiobooks just to keep it quiet. So it's like, producing a podcast can be, difficult and even with the tool like the one we're on now makes it so much easier than when I first started, but getting volume levels right and one day my voice might be off a bit, so I don't know if it'd be me doing it.
Like I forgot again, another podcast, I forgot to turn my camera on. I just turned my camera on 45 minutes into this episode. So I got two cameras. I got my regular computer camera, but I use an external camera that's much better. And I'm 45 minutes in, I looked, I said, oh shit, I forgot again. Right. But I mean, we on now, we good. So after you do the CO guide, the CPO guide, right, you go to co-author the petty officer guide at some point. And what I really respect about that is that it was co-authored by a YN1. I thought that was cool. And how was that process? Were y'all like bouncing ideas off of each other, or were y'all like out of contact with each other?
No. So Dan, so I came across the whole idea. I'm at the Naval Institute. I'm like, all right, if I look on the officer side, right, there's a newly commissioned officer's guide, then there's a division officer's guide and a ship handler's guide and a department, right, all the way up to command at sea. So there was this continuum. I'm like, okay, we got the chief guide and we got the Bluejackets manual, but all this, most of the stuff in the chief petty officer's guide should be presented to a third class petty officer, right? It's fundamental leadership management stuff. So I was like, hey, we got to have a petty officer's guide, right? Where I take most of the CPO guide content, move it in, knowing that there'll be some redundancies. I'll put a lot of that CPO guide on content and build in other stuff in coordination with NLEC and the SEA on what they're talking about. You know what I mean? Because I want to be relevant and reinforce that. But now I'm a fleet mass chief, right? So yeah, I'm a petty officer, mass chief petty officer, but I'm like, no, I want a younger author on this too, who knows it, right? Who knows kind of what's cool is and kind of relevant and dialed in. So Dan Richard happened to be on the kind of advisory board for the Bluejackets manual. So I went to Tom Cutler and I was like, hey, who would I want a co-author for this, a younger co-author. I think it's a cool thing to do. And it's, someone who could eventually take the reins of it. And he recommended Dan. So Dan and I linked up. I had the kind of outline already framed up and the vision for what I wanted to do. But, he's like, I was like, what do you think? He's like, oh no, I think it's great. Right. So we worked the outline together and then, we just broke it up into like sections. I'm like, hey, can you look at this? So he would look at a chapter. Maybe it was already, kind of built out. I had it already written, but he'd go behind and then add to it, or he'd adjust, or he'd put some kind of cool flavor, kind of thing into it. So we didn't see each other face to face, but we collaborated fairly well on the entire thing. So it was a good thing to do with him.
Yeah. And
he made chief. So
well, congrats. We talked about the Bluejackets manual. So now I think it's natural to just go to the podcast, right? So the podcast started as a complement to the CPO guide, right? Kind of getting into more stuff. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm loving this podcast right now. I've been all over it for the last, like, since you started back up. So I listened to it before. And now since you started back up, I've been all over the new episodes. It's an easy listen for the listeners, y'all. It's easy. It ain't 3.5 hours like some of the PTSF episodes, right? You might catch a quick 40-minute. You can run to the market, get some groceries, go back out, but you getting like jewels. Like, so I want to personally thank you and Toby Ruiz for that episode about the senior enlisted leaders, especially in the situation that I'm in right now. That episode was full of jewels in like 40 minutes. Like, it's crazy how you could like talk so much, like Toby breaking down the damn history of things, getting it. So that was really good. And then every single one, April, every single episode, like, it has been a masterclass on what I believe to be leadership. And they also feel like, and that's how I feel about the CPO guy. Like, you know, they talk about like the Bible, right? And the Bible is a book that I'll never read like front to back, right? Ever. But I'll go grab something out of it, look through it, pull something out of it. And I feel like with these Cutlass episodes, I'm always going to go back to. Yeah. You know, this one with Toby, I'm going to probably go back to that about 3-4 times before the month is over. So I definitely appreciate, you know, for the young listeners, I'm going to tell y'all, from my opinion, I don't know, Damon, I'm looking for yours. It's a leadership it's a leadership podcast. It's about leadership. It's about leaders, stuff like that. If you're a young sailor and you want to kind of start getting off and learning about leadership early, then you need to go ahead and listen to it right now. If you were a sailor in a leadership position, you're late. You're late. You need to listen to it. You're late. Right. You need to go ahead and listen to it. It's super, super valuable. And just like the CPO guy, it answers a whole lot of questions that you might be asking and you might not think the answer is anywhere. And on top of this, you're getting people that was on the deck plates that led at some of the even highest levels. You got retired MCPONs, retired Fleet Master Chiefs, retired commanders. So yes, this podcast is incredible. I love it, and I'm loving it right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I learned. So I give this to Alicia Malone. I don't know if you know Alicia. So she was my EA when I was at Fleet Forces, right? So I always, back to a digital age. So I appreciated social media. I wasn't the best at it, but we would go out and about in the fleet, and this does come back to the podcast. And we do the picture, right? Take the picture, do the Facebook post kind of thing. Yeah. And then the next step was like, we were at the Navy Memorial. It was, I forget which one, but it was a Sail of the Year thing. And she's like, hey, I'm going to do a quick video of you coining these sailors this time. Right. So, I coined them, I did I was just me. I wasn't staged, she's like, just be authentic. I'm like, I got it right there. I don't stage it. Right. And we kind of did it. She posted that post, and compared to the pictures, it just was like, got so much reach and kind of engagement. People commented, and I'm like, okay, this video thing is something, right? So it humanizes the person, right? So now you hear me talking and you see the engagement and the body language comes out. So that's when we started. I'm like, hey, what do you think about this thing where we come up on Facebook every Friday and we'll do a Friday with Fleet, right? And she's like, okay, yeah. And she's like, yeah, absolutely, right? So she helped me get through that. And at first it was like Friday with Fleet with just me talking to the camera, doing an update. And I'm like, I was watching, I'm like, yeah, it's all right, but it doesn't, I want people to talk to, right? I'm like, I do better when I'm talking with people and the conversation's organic and authentic and we're going at it. So then Friday with Fleet, I started going out and then huddling with sailors and like, hey, what do you think? Right. And then it was cool, right? It wasn't as scripted. It was just like, hey, I knew kind of what I wanted to talk about. So, and then man, it started to take off, but it was too late in my tour, right? So it was like, okay, well, I should have started that 3, 5, 7 years ago, right? This is a cool thing. And then I tried to hand it off my predecessor or my relief, and he really didn't want to do it, and up to him. So I learned from that, like these conversations bring out so much more, right? Number two, I don't know it all, right? I've got I've got a framework and I've got my approach and my experiences, but it's cool to bounce those up against other people, right? And that's kind of That's what I've tried to get out of it. Like, hey, let's throw some experience. So the book is built around the science, the social science, the power base. This is all proven stuff. You can read not just CPO Guide, but when you read other books, that whole power based framework, like when you read, about ownership, what is it, complete or total ownership? What's it?
Extreme.
Yeah, extreme ownership,
extreme
right?
ownership.
Like I pull that's personal power based building, right? Like that is ownership and my personal accountability. So that is when you listen to that podcast, you are strengthening that power base. But these conversations, I think they're just cool. I think they add something to it. People want to give back. I was at a retirement ceremony today, and saw some older, retired guy. James Williams was there, right? Retired Force Mass Chief. And James kind of, when he retired, he didn't do much. And, today he spoke. He hasn't spoken as a speaker. And he's like, hey, I just felt there's people on the field. And I'm like, no. When you retire, they're going to read the CPO creed and it says we're always on the rolls, right? All those experiences have value to give back to the fleet, right? You need to know where we came from because you're going to be, potentially that fleet mass chief. So I want you to be able to step in that role and not have to go, how does the fleet prioritize manning? You know what I mean? And not learn things already, right? And to know like how to navigate that staff effectively. I'm trying to invest with my experience because honestly, the education system in the Navy just can't give it to you. It just can't. It doesn't have the bandwidth, right? I wish it did. Toby's doing great stuff, but he's not going to get what even he and I were talking about situational leadership. They don't even teach that. And that's a core thing about, how to adjust your leadership style to your audience, kind of thing. So I appreciate that feedback. It's good to know. But again, there's so many topics that you can take and just build experiences but it all stitches back into something. I think that, to your point, that's exactly what I want the CPO Guide to be. It's not a front to cover read. It's I'll pick it up and like, let me read this check, or I'm in this situation, or, let me self-assess myself in this area. That's what I'm hoping to achieve with it.
So, Paul, I have a question for you. So you have written a lot of literature articles regarding leadership. It seems like all of your articles, right, are kind of centered around leadership and leadership styles. Do you feel like the leadership style or leadership, the principles of leadership that worked, we're talking back in the day, it still works now? It's the same leadership right now than it was back in the day, if applied correctly, or do you have to change your style of leadership now to accommodate, the newer generation?
Yeah.
I guess I'm asking if it worked then, does it still work now?
Yeah. So Dwayne Bush and I, right? So I interviewed him today. We had this conversation. So some of that's going to come out next week in that episode. Because we talked about, I had him go back and tell me about that leadership that you grew up under, right? So it was different, right? So the people who led Dwayne, that generation was very focused on positional authority and respect, right? So you don't ask why. And these are the parents of Gen Xers too. Shut the F up, do what you're told. You don't talk back, right? That you're compliant. I'm the command mass chief. I'm the chief. And if you don't listen, I'm going to take you in the fan room. And I'm gonna
at the fan room.
Ecological power, right? Clearly, we're not doing that, right?
Yeah.
So I think then my generation responds to that, like, well, that's not cool, right? So I'm Gen X, and like I've been outside solving my problems, or my peers who didn't have parents in their latchkey, like we've learned to solve our own problems. I don't need some person, like you just give me the tools and the time, I'll get it done, right? You're actually, I could care less about your pretty office and your title, right? I'm more cared about how you can help me get things done. So I think you see that now. Reward power still matters, right? So yeah, you've got to be able to use rewards to motivate people, right? So medals and things. My criticism of that now, they've lost their impact because we've watered them down, right? So the change to giving medals to everyone all the time and the end of tour out the door thing has impacted. You still need that leadership tool, but does it really have value anymore? Right. Back in the day, it was a big deal to get a commanding officer letter of appreciation. Like, wow, in a blue folder. Like, I know we probably still give those, but when you can just give them a NAM and give them 2 points towards advancement, like, I'm not going to give you a letter of commendation. Right. So some of those attitudes, that is not happening. This whole bulkhead counseling leadership style, clearly you're not getting away with that now. Right. And generationally, things have changed with the young, right? So you got to be able to maneuver on social media, I think, to fully lead and influence, right? If you don't appreciate social media and that kind of tool of influence and the reach it can give you, I think you're not fully taking advantage. You got to be able to adapt to that. I'm a big fan of Nuke Power, right? Questioning attitude. I want to know why. I think I should explain why to you, right? So it's not going to resonate with me to say, just shut up and do what I tell you. There may be an instance where the ship has just taken a major hit and there's people dying and people are scared and people are like, I might need to go to that. Stop, listen to me. Like, I don't have time to huddle a team and think through this. Just do what I'm telling you, right? There's a time for that, but it's the rare exception. It's not day-to-day kind of stuff. So I think, I think over the decades, we've gotten more refined with our leadership approaches, right? So I think now, like, you think my chief gave a shit about empathy? I mean, I grew up in the Navy where they were just getting off of the whole, your family didn't come in your sea bag attitude, right? That barely changed, and for the better. So, but situational leadership, if you took that model and applied it back in 1960 and applied it today, if you know how to use situational leadership, it's effective regardless of the generation. You just got to be willing to use it. There's a time to direct. There's a time to coach. There's a time to support. There's a time to delegate. There's always been. And then it just comes down to, is the leader aware enough and mature enough and willing to apply and adjust that leadership style to the audience's maturity to accept it. You know what I mean? So I think there's most of the sound fundamentals, like communication is a fundamental of leadership. Like, you've always had to be able to publicly speak. You've always had to be able to actively listen. We just talk about it a lot more openly now, right? I think we're more vulnerable now. We're willing to just come out and go, hey, here's where I screwed up. I think you go back a couple generations, like it was the suck the tear in the eyeball kind of thing. Like, you didn't show any kind of like authenticity or vulnerability because it was like you were protecting the position. I think that piece of leadership has changed to where, not so much more interested. The position gets you in front of me and I have to do what you say. But if you want me to buy into you, you got to give me more than just your anchors and your collar devices.
Right. And that leads me to my next question. You talked about protecting the position. So I'm a prior LN. So I saw a lot of cases, DFCs regarding or with chiefs, Navy chiefs. So more, I feel like more so now you see it in the media a little bit more. Like, you go on Navy Times every week, someone's being relieved, whether it be in a CO or, some chief is in there. Do you think that there is a leadership issue right now? Or do you think that we're just not really we're not really looking to protect the position and we're just kind of, showing accountability, and the Navy's kind of showing where we are holding our senior enlisted and officers at the same standard?
Yeah, that shift's happened for sure. That's where we're at now, right? With, especially in a digital age, like, it's so transparent now. I mean, you can see that. Look at the Cat Williams interview, right? Like, right? What he's saying. This is the age of the truth, right?
Right.
So you can't hide from the truth in a digital age. And I don't want to villainize. I always say this, right? So I am I think the chief's mess needs to be critical of itself. And there was a time to there's a time and a place, like I said, to kind of work the system and not follow the rule. But when it gets into like sexual assault and stealing, and you don't hide those things, right? And and you can't hide them anymore, right? And that's where it comes out, right? The truth comes out a lot quicker now, right? They back to that coercive power back in the day, right? People would like I could really threaten you with a lot of things. Like Dwayne Bushy's going to talk about, like they could hold your Liberty card over your head, right? And they could say, "Oh, I misplaced your Liberty card," and you were basically restricted for 3 or 4 days until they were able to print it, right? That doesn't happen anymore. So when I remember, and I don't remember how long ago, there was a deliberate decision to start highlighting those leadership reliefs in Navy Times, right? As a kind of showing like, hey, we hold our people accountable, but it should also signal to people like, okay, I don't want to be that person. So I just think, leadership, it's a standard distribution, right? You go in the chief's mess, you're going to have a standard distribution of behavior, right? You're going to have top 1%. You got criminals in there. They're in there, right? They're just waiting to get caught, right? And they may be hiding it, but the truth is going to come out in some way or another. You're going to say something on social media. Someone's going to see you out somewhere you shouldn't be with someone you shouldn't be with. Bam, picture, right? It's over. And then here's another recent one. I don't say super dialed in, but bam, I do check out Reddit, right? Reddit's a great place to pulse, right? That whole thing with the CMC in Norfolk and the barracks, right? Like, sailors will be locked out of their rooms if they fail an inspection. I'm like, ugh. Like, probably not something I'm going to set as a policy, but bam, that thing, picture, right to task and purpose. Bam, right in the news, widespread, right? And now you got the official spokesman answering questions for the policy that came out, right? So back in the day, they could have done stuff like that and the CO would have never known, right? The chiefs would have done that kind of stuff. And sometimes maybe it was warranted. Probably in most cases it wasn't. They were probably abusing their ability to kind of control a Liberty card. But yeah, I think the behavior failures are never going to go away. I think human nature is human nature. Grown people are going to make bad decisions, but you're going to get caught now, and it's going to be very visible. Because remember, the Navy is going to try to protect its brand, right? And if those things are visible, and it doesn't matter at that point. Look at the Fat Leonard stuff, right? I mean, that went into the flag wardroom, right? That high level stuff there. So, you're not hiding it.
Yeah, hey, Paul. So I got a quick question on command, real quick. We got a lot of great leaders out there. We got great senior chiefs, great master chiefs out there. And you start talking about command, they'll be like, "Hey, it's too political." What's your thoughts on that? It's too political.
Yep. So so that was a whole section of that podcast I just did with Toby. So, it is political, right? So I read the definition of what politics is, right? So politics is basically the framework of people with differing constituencies making decisions about resources, making decisions about policies. So my point is, politics is in the unit level. Right? You can't tell me there's not politics in the Sail of the Year board, right? And not, right? Because people are you got people coming in representing different things to make a decision. That is the definition of politics. So the politics change, right? So for me, the politics at the fleet master chief level is like, okay, now the decision making is about big, huge processes, advancement process, manning processes, deployment cycles, right? And you want enlisted representation in the decision making. So if you don't want to do that, I'm with it, right? Not everyone needs to do that. Then go be an LDO or warrant officer and manage the technical side, operate a power plant, run a flight deck. But there's some politics in that too, right? You can't get away from it. So that would be my counter to the politics piece of it. Politics is in everywhere. Politics is in families, right? There's some politicking between a husband and spouse on the decision making about finances and budgets, right? And kind of how that decision is made. I think what they say, they think it's politically correct. I think that's what they're thinking. Like, oh, you got to be an ass kisser and you got to get up there and watch your P's and Q's. So now I have to be politically correct. And okay, got it. Yeah. So yeah, when you're giving an interview on behalf of the Navy, yeah, you just can't say what you want to say. That goes with it. So that's my answer for the political thing. And it's not for everyone, right? It's not.
Yeah.
I didn't feel I had to sell my soul, right? I always felt I could tell the truth. Hell, I was writing articles about what I thought the truth was and putting that stuff out on blast. Mm-hmm. So, but I thought that's what I should be doing, right? Like, no, my job is to represent the truth and to have an opinion and represent, different perspectives to leadership. That's what I'm getting paid to do. And sometimes I'm going to be off base and I'm going to take heat on that. But some things I took personal, but I got over it. Some things I was like, this is the way to do it. And the decision was made the other way. And I had to lick my wounds or go back to the chief's mess and say, hey, we didn't get that one kind of thing. And not everyone wants to deal with that. And not everyone should deal with that.
Yeah. You can't tell people clap like they had a strip club. It's going to mess you up.
Yeah. Not a good one.
Caught my man up.
Now, if you're to the position where like, I think another thing they think is, or they see, right, is like the self-serving person, right? So, no, I'm just going to do what makes me look good. Or, oh yeah, I told the captain that, but you really didn't, right? Like, oh, I said, there's nothing I can do, right? Because I'm trying to lay low and I just want to get, past this tour, and I'm not rocking the boat, so my CO stroked me a good eval because I want to be the force mass chief. Right. And I got to get there. Right. And Dwayne and I we talk about this on that episode. Right. That's when you get into a problem. Like, no. You got to, part of this is delivering the truth. And with knowing like, hey, sometimes you and your boss are, you're going to go in a captain's office someday and he or she's going to be just pissed, not at you, but at something happening, right? And they're going to make a rash decision that is like, stop, not the, and you're just going to have to counsel them as an adult. Like you're going to have to lead up and go, stop. You're being ridiculous. Like take a breather. This decision does not need to be made now. When you're ready to talk about it, give me a call. And let's bring the XO in and talk through this, right? And then if it requires more thinking, give it to me and I'll take it down the chief's mess or get with the LCPOs and go, okay, here's what we're thinking. Give me the pros and cons, right? And at least bring that perspective in and then take it in. And then the decision happens and then, hey, back to the LCPOs and like, hey, here's how it is, right? I did represent that, right? And here's the decision of why it was made on the other end. I think if you inform people with the why, they do that, but not everyone does that. And those are the ones I think give a bad name to the broader program.
So how many years did you do on active duty?
31.
31 years. So What was your deciding factor on going over 20?
So I think most of at that point, so remember, I made mass chief at 14 years. I made it quick, right? And then I was a CMC at the 16-year point. So I was on my second CMC tour when I got to 20 and I knew I had a retirement, right? So I'm like, and by then it was like, being a CMC is tough. I'm not saying it's easy. There's cool things that go with it for sure, right? So the cool things and the rewarding stuff about being able to, if you're doing it right, about, setting command up, shaping command in a positive way, helping sailors manage their careers, making the bad place better. You can really do some cool stuff. It comes with a lot of long hours and it comes with a lot of, like I told you take on stress from everywhere else besides your own stress. But I realized like, man, this is a really rewarding thing for me. So, and then you look out and you're like, all right, hey, cool. I can see this piece of the Navy now. Like, so shore, Guam, I've never been there. Like, and that's shore installation stuff. So I'm like, all right. Now it's the bases and barracks and, fleet and family support centers and, island-wide policy, and it was a joint region in Guam. So it's like, all right, now I get to work with the Air Force. So just professionally, the billet opportunities were always something like, okay, that's something I could it's new and I can just get into that and learn something new. So this kind of growth mindset and learning mindset is what kept me going. And then Japan came open. It's like, okay, now I know installations. Now I've learned that. Now I can take it to a region that has 7 bases. And I've been stationed in Japan before, but I never got to enjoy it. So let's go there. Now we can enjoy Japan too, right? So there was personal and professional stuff that went into it. And I'll tell you, like it, and then it got to the end. I could have kept going on active duty. Right. I got to that last year. But now things were starting to change, right? So I was going through my divorce, right? So you're definitely, the first time I interviewed for MCPON, I told him like, hey, me and my wife, we're going to get separated, right? So I'm not the guy. I can't bring that into MCPON's office, right? That ain't going to happen. They're like, well, still, we still want you to play. Okay, got it. I'll go through it. But there's no way I was going to, even if they're like, I want you to be it. I'm like, no, can't do it, right? I'm not fully focused. It's not the right thing. And then the second time when Geo ended up getting relieved, people came at me again, like, hey, you need to apply. And I'm like, at that point, I had realized that prior conversation, like I had realized how much is up against you're up against to change policy. I was frustrated with fleet manning, but I was like, wow, I can't just make this happen, right? No amount of jumping up and down is going to, do this. And then also the Naval Institute had already reached out and they're like, hey, and I'm like, okay, I was starting to get into that new chapter of writing and influence, right? And I'm like, nah, 31's good. And this is when, all the other, fleets that were applying, I'm like, hey, any one of them can do a great job with this. So I'm going to go down this different path and close the chapter out. But it was professional and personal satisfaction that kind of kept me going.
Nice. Yeah. And so how was the transition after 31 years of the Navy? How was it transitioning into the civilian lifestyle?
Yeah. So again, my path's a little different because the Naval Institute kept me dialed in, right, to the Navy tribe. So my job was to do outreach for, enlisted sailors and Marines and Coast Guard, right? So I would go up to the senior enlisted academy each class and give a brief on the Naval Institute and talk about writing. And I'd go to bases and talk about the Naval Institute. So that piece of the transition, the biggest thing that sucked was moving to Annapolis. My kids are all in the Norfolk area. So I'm like, God, I just said at my retirement ceremony, like, we have the watch and you never have to leave home again. And then the first thing I do is I move to Annapolis. But after 6 months, they let me, before COVID, I started doing remote work. I had met, who was, I was dating who was going to be my current, my wife now. And so that all came together. But so that kind of piece, the general transition was fairly well. And I knew I was ready to go, and I took the habits of working out, like that just translated. I kept my workouts going, so most of my daily routines just transferred over. Yeah, I had to learn, I had to go get my own dentist and my own, start doing medical care. TRICARE stayed the same. I went to a clinic and stuff, but dental breaks off, and that's the work I'm doing now with Blue Cross Blue Shield about dental vision insurance. So when you retire, you have to enroll in the FedVIP program and you have to pick dental insurance now separate, and you have to go get your own dentist. So, that was new. Like, oh, I get to pick now, and but now I gotta pay these extra bills, right? So,
right.
But overall, the biggest thing is once you're out, like, you stay connected, but honestly, you rely, there's people on the field, I call it. Right now, I'm up in the booth calling the shots on the NFL. Like, I'm just an announcer dude now. I'm just kind of calling the shots, what I see and opinions, and a lot of stuff's happening internally. No one comes to you anymore, right? Because you can't do stuff, right? Like, okay, maybe he can give me a good nod for my next kind of thing or that, right? So it goes kind of quiet on that part. Not to say that you don't miss that. But again, through writing and podcasts, I'm like, no, I don't want to get into that mix. I'm not writing articles anymore about how the Navy can fix itself. Actually, that's not true. I just co-authored one. John Cordell got me to write one, co-author with him on, let's get the uniform board modernized, to where, it's transparent and it represents, instead of these kind of Like, where'd this change come from? So we just wrote a piece on that. But I usually don't do that anymore because I'm like disconnected. But the transition went pretty good until COVID blew up, right? Then COVID was really bad because couldn't go to the Senior Enlisted Academy, couldn't go on the base, right? I'm just sitting in my house, like disconnected. Like, this is the experience I think veterans feel that get them in a bad spot. Like, where's my people? Like, I can't talk to my people right now. I'm in the house and I'm on deployment in my house now and I'm sequestered. And that was a challenging time, like where I felt the most, nothing crazy, but where I was like, this really sucks, right? I need to reconnect with people. And then fortunately, this job with Blue Cross Blue Shield doing, Director of Uniform Service Relations. And then COVID eased up so I can go back out. So now it's back in the mix, right? I'm out going back to retirements, not a lot of them, but talking to, chiefs messes here and there during initiation, but, out doing outreach and back with that group of people that we can only communicate as veterans with. So
I see you have a guitar back there. You have a band or something? You
so
play?
I'm not in a band. I don't have time to do that. I do play, but it's just messing around here now. And
nice.
Something I picked up, like a young sailor. That's one thing I always knew. Like, I had an affinity towards the guitar. And then my first ship, I said, all right, I'm just going to go buy one. It's a good way to establish my credit. So bought a guitar and started learning, and then just kind of have done it all along.
Nice.
All right, Paul, we need a memorable experience, man. Something memorable that didn't happen, through your 31 years.
Yep.
I know you got something good for us.
Oh, there's all kinds of stuff. So I was thinking, like, I don't want to do the cliche. So this one, it's a little gruesome, right? But this is memorable, right? So it's not one of the more positive things. So I'm on the USS Juno, and we're doing, we're off coast of Thailand, and we're doing kind of, amphib training ops, right? So we get this call apparently that there was a sunk fishing boat, so they're like, hey, can you help kind of look around for the bodies kind of thing? So sure enough, like, the captain calls me up. He's like, hey, we just came across these bodies, right? So, at this point, people are we're pulled up alongside, and these bodies are like, they've been dead for a couple of days. So they're inflated and they're like floating on the top of the water, right? So I'm like, okay, this is weird, right? And now the crew is starting to muster on the flight deck, and they're like all fascinated with this, right? So I'm like, okay, this got to, and then the captain gets on one MC and he's like, hey, everybody, we got 2 dead bodies coming down the port side. I'm like, and I'm outside now. I'm like, what is it? So now the whole crew is basically coming up, right? So they're looking at these bodies. So I'm telling you, this was like crazy. You talk about crazy sailor stuff. So one of them is like, face down, right? And the other one's face up. The face is eaten off and it's a skull, right? So it's like, holy crap. I've never seen a dead body, right? I know most of these other sailors haven't seen a dead body. Meanwhile, now I got some engineers coming out, and they're throwing nuts and bolts at the bodies trying to get the thing to pop, right?
God.
So I'm like,
oh my God.
Here's like sailor stuff, right? So I'm like, that's it, right? I'm like, out of here, right? So then I'm up to the bridge. I'm like, absolutely, unsad, right? I wasn't up there when he made that call. And then we got to figure out, okay, what do you do with these things, right? So we found them. So then there's like almost a decision to flood the well deck and bring them in, right? And then Chief Deswood at the time, HMC, is like, no way. He's like, you can't bring this freaking stuff on the ship. This is like biohazard. So we sat there for an hour and just did circles and waited and called the Coast Guard, never came and picked those things up. And then we finally had to get going. But I know that's a macabre story, but just like a variety of things. Like, that's not one you see every day, but
Right.
that one,
definitely.
like, you want to talk memorable. There's been great, positive, memorable stuff, but like kind of crazy sea story stuff, that's one of the crazier ones.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
So do you got any friends from your first command?
Yes, actually. So there's a guy, Larry Blakey. So we were young 3rd class, 2nd class petty officers together. So Larry he had gotten to the Ike probably a year or 2 before me, you know what I mean? And more experience. You know, he was qualified and stuff like that. So he was a really great person to lean on, you know, when I was kind of adjusting as a new sailor in my first command. And we still keep in touch. I wouldn't say we're super good friends, but, you know, he's definitely on my phone. He called me like 6 months ago and he's like, hey, you know, because he works down in Alabama at a power plant. And he's like, hey, remind me about how we parallel generators. He's like, was it slow enough? I'm like, and I remembered all this stuff. So I was in a bar in DC for a meeting, you know, one evening, and he called me and he's like, hey, do you remember? I'm like, yeah, you know, and then we just caught up. But he definitely was like, when I'd be stressed out, it was great to be able to talk to him. He was a great source. And then one of the guys, his name's Jim Texan. So he was a chief at the time when I was on that ship. And then I ended up coming back to Enterprise when I had made chief. He was now a senior chief and we connected together. So I still, you know, I'm connected with him on Facebook and stuff. But again, he was a great influence on me. So, and then, you know, personal friends, I've got, you know, one of my best buddies growing up in Fort Lauderdale. Him and I are still friends. He's out in Tennessee now, but
yeah. So the reason I asked that question, because listening to your podcast, it seemed like a lot of people you talk to, you've built relationships with. Some of these people that you talk to, you built relationships with. And it seemed like you were able to create, cultivate, and retain these relationships. And my question for you is this. When you start to get that high up in that leadership level, is it difficult to create, cultivate, and retain relationships with other people that's that high up in that leadership level when based on my perspective, it seemed like the times y'all get together are for like formalities or conferences or, you know, things where y'all having conversations that got to be had.
Yeah. So now, so when I transitioned from being a nuke to command master chief, obviously, you know, I kind of left my nuke tribe and I went out to Japan. And at the time we didn't have nuke aircraft carriers. So there's no nukes out there at that point. So I walked into the first command. It's like, okay, I'm in the conventional Navy now, you know, and I met, you know, but I, you know, through my style, I gelled with this cheese mess. But at the same time, like I told you, my buddy Glenn Mallow, who was 2 years in front of me, he was on the Oak Hill and I, you know, so I was reaching out to him. So that was one friendship, you know, that I still have. We're going to meet next week. You know, we still meet once, you know, as much as we can and just kind of catch up on stuff. And so I had that relationship with Glenn, right? And then you get on the command master chief tour and then you're meeting new chiefs, but then also you got these other command master chiefs now, like in your ARG or in, you know, in your Desron or whatever. And you're meeting them, but you meet frequently enough or you see them out in housing, you know, when I was overseas, or you see them at the Chiefs Club, right? So now you start forming those kind of networks. And then one of them might go, you know, up a level, you know, but you still know them, you know, and now they're your ISIC CMC. So you still have that relationship that you carry, and then you transfer and, you know, you might not know anyone there, but hey, you know, I'm back in Norfolk now. So, hey, I'm connected with some of my nukes because I'm at VFA 211 and now I'm assigned on the Enterprise. And that was the ship I was ship's company on. So I know all these nukes again. But at the same time, I'm gelling with these new squadron command master chiefs. You know, and once you meet them, you know that CPO mess connection power, right? Like they might not be deep relationships, but they're deep enough to where, hey, I've cruised with you for 6 months. We've been on Liberty together. Like, you know, I definitely know, like, I can reach out and talk to you for, you know, questions, advice, you know, help when I need to. And that's kind of how it worked itself up. And then now you're force master chief, or you're at that level. But the other force master chiefs, you probably worked with them along the way. And if you haven't, you're going to meet them at meetings and other things, and you're going to gel and develop some kind of relationship. So it kind of naturally works itself out. You don't get isolated up there. And I know some of the, you know, command master chiefs, Fort Fleet, they know people that are still in their community. They grew up within their rating. The thing with nukes, though, most of them are out at 20. So once I was at that level, there's very few nukes that I knew. I like Cindy Hooray Tech is still on active duty, but that's one thing I noticed. Like, you stop knowing the names on the advancement list for the nukes that are making master chief, and it's like, oh gosh, I don't even know anyone making master chief anymore, right? But the people you know them. And even now, as they retire, you know, I wish we all go different places once you retire, you know, so you don't talk as much. But I know if I reach out to them and go, hey, I'd love to have you on and have a conversation. You'd be perfect for this. They're like, oh yeah, absolutely. And then you just figure out the schedule.
Yeah. So another question about connection and leadership, right? So for me, my secret weapon used to be, I'm going to get my hands dirty too, right? That used to be like as a chief, first class, that works in a suit, whoever, that used to be my way to win the guys over, right? Win the division over. Hey, chief getting his hands dirty too. He do the work too. As you climb up, the chain of command, I believe like it's occasions where you lose that opportunity to get your hands dirty too, but you still got to continue to inspire the connection with like these sellers, right? And you might have touched on it before with the Fridays with Fleet, but my question is, how do you continue to inspire connection as you continue to disconnect from that deck plate level?
Yeah. So that's a realization, right? People got to recognize that, you're not going to be like that. But I think the thing I would offer, I would always say, like, you can never take out of my heart the experience of standing six on, 6 off for a 6-month deployment, right? And you'll never take out the experience of, being on, a deployment and then, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait and then our ship gets extended and we go. I know what it's like. I never forget what it's like to clean shitters in the bathroom, right? And go through zone inspections, right? There's that enlisted kind of experience that we all have that I think I can walk into, at least I felt I could, in a very authentic way. Like, I know what sailors are doing when I open that door, like, and they're like straight, like, I know they've been up back there, right? I'm like, I know what you guys are up to. That was my way. Like, oh, I know what you guys are up to. Like, tell me the secrets, Yeah. Because I know they're telling secrets or they're in a bitch book or, doing whatever it is. That sailor stuff that we all do. I don't need to be technically connected to you. I'm connected to you through that enlisted experience, right? I've been there. I've done that. I know those experiences. I know what it's like to lose a family member deployed, right? But that was, and the other thing was always like, as a fleet master, it was cool. I got to go on these platforms, like, okay, like, I don't know what this, tell me about this thing. Like, what's this thing do, right? And give them the opportunity to teach me what it does, and then like, all right, hey, what can I do for you? What's hurting your head? That was always the way that seemed to work really well. And then, you go into chief's mess, right? You learn over time, like, okay, this is the emotional intelligence piece that you got to be able to like, okay, I'm putting it out. Is it connecting or not? Right. You got to be able to see, are they connecting with what I'm putting out? And you can read it, but you and I know, like, you can drop it and just with the way you say something, they'll know you've been there and done that. They'll know what you're talking about. And I've always been able to do that. I've been able to enjoy being in Chiefs clubs when we used to have them. I know they're still here or there, but like real Chiefs clubs, and I know what it's like to be on Liberty, in the Westpac, and kind of, right. I know that experience. I don't need to tell you the details, but I can tell you like, oh, I know, right. Like just with that look and a little wink. And I know I'm connected to you with that experience that any sailor is going to have. It might be a little different these days. But I think that's how we stay connected, or we should.
Yeah. So, and I got to ask you this question.
Yeah.
Well, you give a lot of nuggets out on your podcast, right? So my question for you is this. What would be your very first nugget that you would give to a young senior chief that's going into the SEL program? So a young command senior chief, like what would be the first nugget?
So the first nugget's going to be, it's not even a nugget. It's like, I don't know. Here's what I would tell them. Like, you're going to get a lot of information from the SEA. You're going to go through that course. Here is my recipe for success. And I'm young. And, again, when I went in, and this is based on the Juneau Chiefs mess, I walked in, I was a 16-year command master chief, right? When I walked on that ship, there were 4 senior chiefs that were high year tenure. There was a BMCS, an AB, ABH senior chief. There was a CS, and a PSCS, right? I found out later in the career at my Helen Farwell, when I first walked on, they're like, who's this kid? Right. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm the command master chief. Right. So I had to realize when I went into my mess, like, you can't go in that mess with if you're younger than them, right, you just got to recognize like, no, I have a role. I've got the position, but I've got to connect personally, right? So I said, okay, I've got an option here. I can just try to shove it down their throat and go, I'm the command master chief, and like, yeah, lose them right away. And they'll roll their eyes and go, yeah, whatever, shut up. You've never been out here. We've been on 4 deployed. We know what's going on. No, I chose like, no, there's a natural leader here. I'm going to friggin', bring them in. But I pulled every 4 of them in. I said, tell me 3 things that are going well and give me 3 wins right away. And they told me the things we need to keep doing. And then those 3 wins they each gave me were pretty consistent. I took those 3 wins. I went up to the captain. I said, I need to make these changes now, right? These are easy to make. I need 3 wins. He gave them to me. We adjusted the policies, and then I had the chief's mess, right? From then it was like, I didn't need to force anything or anything. I just did that. And then I always made sure I collaborate. You're going to have that group of LCPOs. That is your brain trust right there. You bring them on. That's your team. You empower them in your decision-making process with an understanding that, hey, it may not always go your way, and you've got them. So don't step out on just the positional power and the cookie. Get the LCPOs on board, and you've got it.
I don't know if I think I seen it in one of your articles. Well, maybe it was a video too. I'm not sure, but you said the selection board has a huge influence on CPO behavior. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yep. So, I'm a big believer, like one of the areas that, like I said, liberal studies. So if you want to learn about human behavior, study economics, right? So this is where people make decisions on how to make, on scarce resources. So I always trace things back to people's economic decision making, right? So, and I got it. We are serving our country and all that, but you need money to live, right? And in a modern economy, you need 2 people making money, right, to bring up a family, right? So every bit of money you can make matters, right, to your quality of life and your kids' future and things like that. So, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You need more than that, right, to be kind of professionally satisfied and be the best you can be and to give back to the organization. But so I have to make an assumption like, hey, people are, they want not just the money that goes, but hey, there's some authority. They want more influence on the organization, these things. So the selection board tells you the recipe, right, through the precepts and now what are they called? ECPs, right? Enlisted career paths, right? They lay it out. If you want to get to this next position, here's what you got to do. So when I told chiefs, like, it's not just good enough to be, solid in your rating and be, do those kind of things, but then you got to have collateral duties, right? What do you see, right? You see all these collateral duties. And those collateral duties traditionally had been held by officers in the wardroom. And then all of a sudden, where do I see them? Like every first class in chief owns all the collateral duties, right? So I'm like, okay, so you see this behavioral shift, and that's okay, but there's trade-offs, right? Some of those collateral duties, take a lot of time and have a lot of requirements that go to them. When I put a message in there, like you got to show, and I remember this, involvement in the chief's mess, right? So it's not just good enough to be, your division chief job or whatever. Now you've got to have a collateral duty, and then I've got to show leadership and involvement in the chief's mess. Okay, well, that wasn't something when I was getting advanced to chief. It wasn't that, right? It was the old evals too, by the way. Everything on the back of those evals, if I could show them to you, right? You had a big, huge block on that eval. Like it was full. There was nothing about collateral duties. There was nothing. It was about what I fixed, what maintenance got done, what quals, what my people were achieving, all that. And then someone thought it was important to show leadership in the chief's mess as a breakout. So then you see this growth of like, I got to be the treasurer and I got to lead this chief's mess thing. And I got to, I'll design a coin and a t-shirt, right? But people start put that in their resume, right? So fleet behavior starts to follow this kind of signal that the selection board is putting out. So, because again, like I'm not just, some people I guess are comfortable like, hey, I'm a chief now. I never want to make another dollar again. I'm happy where I'm at. I'll just sit here and just do the same thing over and over again. Well, I think your sailors deserve more than that, by the way. But most people want to advance in the organization. That's what I meant by that. Like, so if I put something, if I prioritize something, like if I put right now, like, hey, all senior chiefs will be advanced due to their 3M scores, right? Or their kind of whatever inspection they have to do, maintenance inspection, right? Kind of however you do, like if I could get, inspectors to give an official grade and that went into your eval, I guarantee you would friggin' have your maintenance squared away. The material condition of your ship would be squared away, right? You would and if no one talked about collateral duties, they'd be like, well, sir, you can take that collateral duty. I ain't got time. I'm too busy to focus on these things. I think you'd see those kind of things. So, I don't think it's manipulative. I think it's just human nature, and it's how you incentivize.
Right.
Heck, I get, my current job, like, there's bonuses assigned to how many number of contracts our program gets, right? So, okay. And that can be a healthy bonus. So, oh, you're damn right. Me and my team are trying our best to meet those, right? It's not just, it's like, here's the threshold, here's this level, here's superior. Like, oh, we want superior, right? And we don't cut corners to get it, right? We put the work in to get it. But, it sends a signal. And we come in, we want to be, fulfilled in our job. But at the end of the day, oh yeah, that'd be a nice bonus to get for me and my family to do some stuff.
Right.
So that's where I think that's at. I think it's a very powerful tool if you get those precepts right, and you can really shape fleet behavior. Like, hey, de-emphasize the points on collateral duties. I don't think awards should be a part of the advancement. No, the award is already the award for you've already recognized the person with the award and the medal.
Right.
Take the points out of it, because this is why awards don't mean shit anymore, right? Because like every CEO is trying to set their sailor up, like give them 2 points here, right? And like now everyone's maxed out in awards. So now they're not a differentiator. Now it's become the opposite. If you don't get an award, it shows you're a dirtbag, right? So it's like, what are we doing?
So what's your, this is going to be a weird question, as a matter of fact. That's how I wanted to introduce this. Because I'm about to ask for a book recommendation, and you got a bunch of books. So maybe it's one of the books that you were a part of. But do you have a book recommendation that's not one of the books that you were a part of?
So I went to a book phase too. So I don't know if I took nuggets. So the book that got me thinking about this was a college textbook, and I don't have the name of it. It's actually cited. There's a chapter that was called Conceptions in Power and Influence. It's cited in the CPO guide. And how I came across this, I was in Japan. We were doing a trip, so believe it or not, not Singapore, but Diego Garcia was one of the bases that fell under Region Japan. So, they're like, hey, we want Love to come on out here. So like, all right, me and the boss go out. It's a long haul to get. You got to stop in Singapore, and then you got to go into Diego Garcia. So the flag aide was on this flight, and he was in a textbook, and I was like, hey, what are you studying there, sir? And he's like, hey, it's, he was working on his master's degree in leadership. And I was like, hey, what's that book about? And he's like, he hands it to me, and I'm reading through it. I come across this chapter. I'm like, start reading it, and I'm like, are you using this now? He's like, no. So I read this, and it kind of blew me away with this whole power bases and influence tactics thing, right? So it's like, this is what we need, right? This is the keys to it all, right? This is the framework that people need to understand. So that chapter of all of them set the framework of like, okay, here's the model. Like now I can take that and combine that with what I've seen and I've learned practically. Now it all kind of comes together and makes sense. So here's why I was able to influence in the way I was, because I had high personal power and expert power. So that's why I was able to demonstrate that. And then people trusted me. So it's in the CPO guide. It's a chapter in that. It's I don't know if it's an organizational leader handbook, like textbook, but that chapter on conceptions of power and influence, I could only distill it down in the CPO guide. Into kind of I took what's in that, and kind of that's what created that framework, that power and influence model that I kind of, I'm a visual person. So I kind of took everything I read and put it into a visual. But these days I find myself watching more YouTube videos. honestly. You know what I mean? I'm a visual person. So I'm like, I read just for recreation now, but I don't know if there's a leadership book. As you'll hear in the podcast, I'm like, well, I think the framework, if I take different, regardless of whatever book you want to read, there's a lot of good things out there, but they usually will none of them is going to give you the absolute model. You know what I mean? The complete picture. They're all going to have a little bit, right? So this book, like I said, is going to talk about personal power. This book's going to talk about how to build connection power. This book's going to tell me a little bit about how I can use this influence tactic. You know, how to win friends and influence people is a good one, right? That's personal power, and it's influence tactic based, right? So you should read widely. You know, there's some great ones, and I think I've tried to reference them in the CPO guide in the back, and definitely in the Petty Officer's Guide. There's a whole bunch of them as well. But I don't have one that I don't even tout the CPO guide is one thing. Of course, you know, I think it's one of many great resources, but I think there's great podcasts like this. I think there's great, video stuff that you can be watching. There's LinkedIn learning courses now that people can do, and there's cool videos on that people should do. Just kind of find an area that interests you and go after it.
Yeah. Hey, what should do better?
So I think, I thought about this one. So like, I'm going to say like, what got you here won't get you there. So, and this is in particular, like this is my point to the Chief's mess about continual learning, right? So, okay, got it. You're selected as a Chief Petty Officer. Yeah. What got you there is not going to make you successful as a Senior Chief, right? And then what makes you successful as a Senior Chief in a department LCPO is not going to make you successful as Command Master Chief. You're going to have to learn new stuff. You're going to have to learn how to influence through new people, right? So as a Senior Chief, I was taught as a young chief, if you want to be a Senior Chief, show me you can lead, influence chiefs to get things done, right? So you have to do that. And then you want to be Command Master Chief, right? Like, okay, show me, you've worked well with an 04 and, a couple chiefs, in divisions that are under you. What can you do with an 06? Right. Are you comfortable with that? How comfortable are you with an 06? Are you ready to walk in an office to a senior 06 and tell them stuff's all screwed up? Can you handle the heat and the blowback when they don't agree? Can you manage a chief's mess now? Like the whole chief's mess. Can you walk into with the XO and manage a wardroom with them? Right. Like you should care about how well the wardroom's functioning. You should be able to tell the XO, like, your wardroom's jacked up, right? Or communication across the command. Can you do that? So you got to be able to continually open your aperture, learn about new forms of communication. Maybe you can huddle your division and give a pre-evolution brief, but can you get up in front of an audience of people and give an all hands call? Those are two different skill sets, right? Can you handle the blowback from an all hands call? When a sailor stands up in the back of it and brings up a very personal thing, right? And you take offense to it, right? How do you handle that, right? What you did as a division chief, you can't take that approach to a theater full of sailors, you know what I mean? Kind of thing. So that's my thing, is always what got you here won't get you there. You're going to have to continue to learn.
Damn, man. Left me in gloom. I'm thinking about that all hands card, that seller saying something, but I ain't knowing how to respond, man. Hey, Paul, man. Like I said already, I appreciate the podcast. I appreciate just connecting with you, just as we scheduling and kind of talking and getting other little nuggets from you as well. So I appreciate it all. I'm looking forward. I think me and Teach going to be on your show soon. I'm looking forward to that, because some of what we talked about, I was like, oh man, I don't want to get too crazy into it, because some of what we talked about is what we're going to be talking about. I got some notes. I've been I got notes, Paul, because I'm looking forward to that experience, y'all. And like I said, for the listeners, give Cutlass Podcast a listen, man. It's a lot about, especially the chiefs that listen to the podcast. It's a lot about leadership. For the young sailors, it's definitely some episodes for y'all. And if y'all want to kind of start gearing up, definitely start listening now. But for these chiefs, man, y'all need to go ahead and get this podcast a listen. But hey, Paul, man, I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
No,
and I'm
you
looking
guys
forward to your show.
Hey, same here with me too, Paul. Hey, thank you for coming on the pod, man. You're leaving a big time legacy, man. Big time, man. A lot of stuff out there that you're doing. So you already know, I'm sure they already told you I'm going out on inspection, so I'm not going to be there. But anytime You find a little gap in there.
Yeah.
You find a little gap somewhere. Hit me up. I come on, man. Anytime.
I got a whole. Here they are, right here. I got this list is like. I had to put it on hold right for a couple of years because of the job. Like I had all these topics and cool. Like I want to do like top 10 badass U.S. Navy chiefs. Right, like let's go back to our history, like, and kind of. I don't know how to do that one yet. And then what else I got on here? A lot of these I've done now, but 10 essential reads, talking about reading and stuff. But I won't be the only one doing that. So no, you guys are doing great stuff. I love it. Keep it going. I've subscribed. I love the one you just did with the captain. That was good. I was listening to his gig, right? So good stuff there, right? I'm kind of listening and going, we need more of him,
Right.
And that came out. You guys brought that up, and just the nuggets he offers, but unfortunately, there's not enough.
No. Hey, and where can they find you? Where can the people find you?
So I do have I got a Facebook page. I know that's kind of dated. I got all the social media. I'm just like, Instagram is the one I'm the worst at. I just can't quite get it yet. So I'm on LinkedIn. I post a lot of stuff there. So it's Paul Kingsbury at LinkedIn. So you can hit me there. Facebook, I think RET, Retired Fleet CM, Paul Kingsbury or Kingsbury. So I got that Facebook. Obviously I got Cutlass Podcast. There is a website. Again, I've kind of dropped off on the main, but there's some of my articles and some blogs and stuff I was written. That's cutlassleadership.com. And then now I'm starting to get the YouTube thing now that I love how Riverside makes it so easy to upload stuff there. So that one's called Paul's Cutlass Classroom. So at Paul's Cutlass Classroom. So I'm starting to build the videos into there. There's some older ones. I originally started with the YouTube thing and then talked off of it and went into the podcasting. And now I'm like, man, I should have done the YouTube thing the whole time. But and then my email, paulie8m@gmail.com. If people got ideas for podcast episodes, they can send me a note there, or I'm always willing and able, like you want to bring up, kind of do it. Well, it's not Sailor 360 anymore, right? I think that's gone. That dates me right there. But hey, if you want me to come up, do an Ask Me Anything with you, with your chief's mess or your sailors or whatever, we can do that virtually. I'll do that all day.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. It's still Sailor 360. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, retired Fleet Forces Master Chief, Fleet Master Chief, the author of every book that we should be reading. Paul Kingsbury, man. Thank you so much, man.
Appreciate you.